The Sheikh's Accidental Heir, Sharjah Sheikhs Book 2, written by Leslie North, narrated by Nicholas Thurkettle. Chapter 1. Ahmed Al-Qasimi was watching the only thing of interest in the entire penthouse. In fact, he'd been watching the brunette with the stunning green eyes all afternoon as she worked silently with the rest of the catering staff, carrying trays of finger foods to the clusters of businessmen about the room, clearing plates and filling pitchers. More than once he'd tried to catch her eye as she tucked her shoulder-length dark hair behind an ear to keep it out of her face. The smile she gave the guests as she paused to check on them caused an unfamiliar pang of jealousy. Wishing she'd turn her smile his way, he'd watched, admiring the way her black pants hugged her legs and hips. Her white button-down blouse did not show off her breasts as well as he would like, but the hint of soft curves intrigued him. She remained focused, paying more attention than any of the staff to fanning out the paper napkins artfully, wiping the condensation from the pitchers of ice water, or pulling a wilting flower from one of the arrangements. If she wasn't the supervisor, she ought to be. He'd been waiting for a chance to strike up a conversation with her, but he wanted more privacy than afforded by a room full of Americans whom he and his brothers had been sent to meet, while their father, Sultan bin Mohammed Al-Qasimi, had spared no expense, renting out the entire top floor of the hotel to introduce his sons to various vendors and businesses. Ahmed found himself unable to focus on anything except the scenery. Golden afternoon light poured into the spacious room through windows that overlooked Manhattan's west side. From the lush couch where he sat, he could see an infinity pool that seemed to plunge over the edge of the roof. He almost wished this visit was for pleasure. Such a waste to spend the afternoon stuck inside, listening to the plans and ideas of men in designer suits, when they all could have better enjoyed a dip in the pool as they sipped from the delectable beverages the bartender was serving. Shaking his empty glass and interrupting the conversation he wasn't listening to, he stood. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I'm parched." He nodded to everyone and walked to the bar. Placing his empty glass on the counter, he turned. The slender brunette was slipping through the glass doors and out onto the patio. Her gaze slid across the room as she slid the door closed. When she saw him, she paused for a moment, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. He held her gaze. The way the color went up in her cheeks was lovely, but he didn't wait for her to break the spell. He strolled through the penthouse, maintaining the easy carelessness that had become his habit, and for which his father had chastised him many times. He nodded to those who made eye contact and brushed past the others. His brothers were working the room quite efficiently, and he saw no need to duplicate their efforts. He also didn't want to stop to talk. He might have to work later. Right now he only wanted to personally thank the woman who'd been working tirelessly to make sure this event ran smoothly. Slipping out the glass doors, he took in a breath as the noise of the city and lingering heat of the day hit him. It was not as hot as his homeland, but New York clung to a muggy humidity that stuck his shirt to his back. The sounds of car horns and traffic and the wail of emergency vehicles echoed from the other buildings, distant and far below the penthouse. Turning, he walked away from the pool, past a large sitting area and fire pit. He found the brunette just around the corner, leaning against the wall and staring at her phone. Her ankles were crossed, emphasizing both her slender legs and the curve of her hips. "Beautiful," he muttered. Glancing up at him, she frowned and lowered her phone. "I'm sorry, what?" He gestured to the skyline. "The view. It's beautiful, yes?" She looked where he was pointing and nodded. The sun pulled rays of gold and red from her dark hair and touched a little gold to her skin. "When you live here, you don't often get the view from the 30th floor. "Would you like a drink?" He waved back toward the bar. "I could fetch us each something wet, Miss—" "It's Melanie, and no, thank you." She smiled with just a curve of her lips, and he noticed her lower lip was full and sensual. "I'm still on duty." Her voice was light, but her words carried a tinge of sharpness. Ahmed chuckled and put out his hand. "I'm Ahmed, and now you sound like one of my father's security men. My father would certainly prefer the bartender serve only our American business partners." She shook his hand, her grip firm. He liked her utterly Western attitude. Pulling her hand from his, she asked, "A traditionalist?" She tucked her phone back into a back pocket. He leaned his shoulder against the wall next to her. This close, he could smell a hint of something like lemon. Her shampoo, perhaps. "Old-fashioned is a better description. And angry." She tipped her head to one side. "Sounds like there must be a story there." She nodded again, but didn't ask questions. Gesturing back to the door behind them, he found he wanted to tell her more. Something about those sparkling green eyes, shimmering with intelligence and a touch of sympathy, invited a confidence. "My brothers and I aren't above enjoying a good party or three. Things got out of hand at one of them, and word got back to him, so now we must work, and report back daily as if we are all still boys." She gave a laugh, and he liked the sound of it. A throaty chuckle, deep and genuine. "Dads always find out. But aren't you three pretty big to be doing what Dad always wants?" He shrugged. "Habits are hard to break. Our father has trained us well to do as he asks, and to risk his temper. Well, it is not always us who suffer, but those around him, so we try carefully to protect them." "Ah, more of a when the cat's not looking, the mice." She broke off the words and looked him over, her eyes warming and the smile lifting the corners of her mouth again. "Okay, that image won't work with any of you guys. Foxes loose in a henhouse? Wolves in the fold?" Laughing, he shook his head. He forced his mouth down and tried to look serious. "We are most definitely not foxes." I noticed you didn't say anything about wolves." Her voice was lovely, like music drifting past on a warm summer night. Her lips perfectly formed every word as she spoke, taking their time as if carefully tasting each sound as it passed. Ahmed looked her up and down again, making sure she saw his gaze was drifting over her body. "I'd like to make use of that pool at some point. Seems a shame to waste such a temptation. You should join me." Tipping her head to the side, she met his stare, her own equally assessing and, he thought, interested. But she shook her head and her mouth pulled down ever so slightly. She had a very straight nose, almost a little too strong for her face, and strong bones, and a determined chin. "A swimsuit isn't part of my uniform." Leaning toward her, he let his arm brush hers. "Perfect. We can—" She put a hand over his mouth. Her fingers weren't soft, but were roughened by work. She also smelled of champagne and shrimp. "Don't say it. Let's not spoil the evening with cliches about skinny dipping. I gave that up in my college years." Taking her hand, he held on to the tips of her fingers. "I was going to say we can sit with our feet in the water, looking over the city as if we owned it." She gave another soft, deep laugh. "Sure you were." "Now I'm determined to figure out how to get you away from work. What if I pay your boss to let you take the rest of the day off?" Pulling her hand out of his, she lifted one dark eyebrow. She had high, arched eyebrows, perfectly shaped. Her one vanity, he thought, for she wore little makeup. "My boss is a total slave driver. Always has to put the catering business first and never even gives me a full weekend off. In fact, I usually have to work extra on the weekends and maybe get a few hours during the week to simply crash." Ahmed tucked his hands into his pockets. The temptation to touch her, to tuck that stray strand of dark hair back behind her ear, to stroke a finger down her cheek, to try and take her hand back, was almost too much. "And yet here you are, lounging outside." She patted her back pocket and he glanced down at her, wishing he could do the same to that lovely round ass. "Juggling business calls. As I said, work never ends." "But you must eat, yes?" "Yes, but—" "But what? You must eat, as must I, and who does not want to show off their homeland? What one place must I not miss while I am here? Some place with New York pizza or a street hot dog or some delicacy I could never obtain anywhere else." She shook her head and waved back to the glass doors. "There's not enough to tempt you? Lobster straight from Maine? Creole sausage rolls? Chicken a la? Ah la la la. I am speaking of real food. Crossing her arms, she stared at him. Now I'm starting to feel insulted. Ahmed couldn't help laughing. No disrespect meant. The food is wonderful, delicious, but who can live on tiny bites of this or that? I'm speaking of real food, the food of the people. Now that is an experience everyone wishes. She gave a soft hum and lifted a hand to tap a finger against her chin. He found the gesture charming. She seemed to realize what she was doing, for she dropped her hand, her cheeks warming slightly. Smiling at him, she said, That's an idea. I'll have to think about that. Right now, duty calls. I have to head back inside. She straightened and smoothed a hand down her blouse, tugging it straight. Giving in, Ahmed caught her hand again. 2 minutes more. Let the others deal with everything for just 2 minutes. Let me show you something. He turned and pulled on her hand, but she hung back. I can't leave the work for everyone else. So serious. With a grin, he tugged on her hand again. The wind came up, and again the stray strand of hair came loose and brushed her cheek. He reached to tuck it back again, wanting to see if it was as silky as it looked. She beat him to it, pushing the wayward strands behind her ear. Come, the world will not fall apart in 2 minutes. You'd be surprised just how fast disaster happens. He glanced back at her, eyebrows lifted, wondering why she sounded so serious. But this time when he tugged on her hand, she came with him. He led her around the patio to the other side of the surrounding terrace. The sun was just setting, a ball of orange in the west, its rays filtered by other buildings, turning the metal and glass into reflections of golden light. Next to him, Melanie caught her breath. Ahmed smiled. See, was it not worth the 2 minutes? She gave his hand a squeeze and then slipped from his grip again. Okay, so it was. Thank you. This is a sight you don't forget. Leaning on the railing, he asked, You can't always work. What do you do for fun? She shrugged and grinned. I work. What else? I'm a driven New Yorker. A sparkle lit her green eyes, bringing out hints of gold in the depths. He straightened and stepped closer, leaning down to put his mouth close to hers as he spoke. Have dinner with me. Save me from a horrible, boring evening. I want to get to know you better. She stood her ground, not turning away, not stepping back. Instead, she lifted her chin, her lips curving and parting slightly. He could see her chest rise a little faster as her breaths quickened. His pulse did the same. She leaned even closer, and for an instant he thought she would put her mouth on his. Her scent wrapped around him, and he caught a hint of musky arousal. But instead of kissing him, she pressed her hand against his chest. I have to go back to work, and your brothers must be wondering where you are by now. You don't want to disappoint Daddy, do you? Turning, she dropped her hands and started to walk away. Reaching out, Ahmed touched her arm. She stopped and glanced back. I live with the idea that what my father does not know does not hurt anyone close to him. Please, take pity on a stranger in your land. One dinner. I'll buy. Your favorite place. She licked her lips. His heart gave a hard thud. With that teasing smile curving her lips, she said, It's going to take about an hour to clean up after the party ends. I'll wait for you. Her smile grew. The world had darkened around them. Lights were fluttering on below them and around them on other buildings. Ahmed stood still. His breath held. He could no longer see Melanie clearly now, but when she spoke again, her voice had thickened with what he thought was the same hunger in his veins. I'd like that. She turned and strolled back to the party. Ahmed smiled. The evening was suddenly interesting. Back inside the suite, the noise from too many voices talking was like walking into a wall. He hesitated and then dove in, determined to get through this ordeal. At least he had something to look forward to. He grabbed a bottle of San Pellegrino from the bar and glanced around, looking for his brothers. Zaid was the only one really engaging the suits gathered. Zaid had always been the most dutiful of them. Ahmed headed over to where Khalid sat on a couch, thumbing through his phone, checking messages, no doubt. His eldest brother had always been the responsible one. Sitting down, Ahmed draped one arm over the back of the couch and asked, "What vital conversation did I miss?" Khalid opened his mouth to answer, but Ahmed waved a hand. "That was a sarcastic, rhetorical question, brother. I wasn't paying attention to any of them to begin with." Staring at him, eyes slightly narrowed, Khalid said, "You really don't like all of this, do you?" Ahmed shrugged. "Business is always there, is it not? So why not take the opportunity here for a little fun?" Khalid shook his head. "It is time to start taking some of this seriously. Some day soon, Father will lose patience with you. You're no longer the baby of the family, Ahmed. Father expects you to become a man." Raising his hand, Ahmed held it in front of him. "Now you sound too much like him." Khalid's mouth pulled down. He was starting to look too much like their father, too. His figure had thickened slightly. Married life was turning Khalid into a dull husband. They all shared the same heritage of their father's dark hair and eyes, but Khalid seemed happy. Ahmed frowned at that thought. Happy was not a concept he courted. He wanted excitement. He wanted to live before their father tied all of them to the lives he had planned for them. Ahmed squirmed in his seat. He was growing impatient with being the youngest, the last one Father ever thought about, the one who had nothing to do other than let his older brothers learn the business like Zaid, or start having grandchildren as Khalid seemed intent on doing. He was here in America, far from his father's disapproval, and he had a lovely woman willing to dine with him, and perhaps more. American women were wonderful in how they went after their own pleasure like a man. He glanced around and saw Melanie, back at work again, supervising a new tray of some tiny treats that were to be passed around. He watched as she worked her way around the room. She did not look his way, and he knew she was trying hard not to. Ahmed sipped his water and waited for Khalid to take up his lecture again. But his brother surprised him by slapping a hand on Ahmed's shoulder and standing. "You should find yourself a wife." Ahmed gave a snort. "So says the married man, who only wishes to see others chained. I am satisfied with my life as it is." Khalid shook his head. "Choose on your own, brother, before Father chooses for you." "Oh, he will have to marry Zaid off first, and then he will pay attention to me, perhaps. Until then, I will live life to the fullest." "Meaning you will find trouble for yourself and the family." Khalid shook his head. "Father's patience is not endless, and neither is your life. Find something you want, Ahmed, and go after it. Father will never respect you until you learn first to respect yourself." Khalid strode off to Zaid's side. Ahmed turned away from him. His older brother was wrong. Someday Ahmed would earn their father's respect. Just not today, given what he was planning. The party seemed to be winding down. Guests were taking their leave. Khalid and Zaid still worked the room, and Ahmed sat where he was, frowning at his water and wondering why Khalid's words stuck under his skin like a sliver of glass. Find something he wanted. Was he not always doing that? And always having his father or his brothers tell him that was not a fit thing for the son of the Sultan of Sharjah? Of course, that only made him go out to find yet another thing to irritate his father. He knew he enjoyed that a little too much. It had been his only hobby growing up, and the only way to ever get his father's attention. Well, too late to break such a habit now. He grinned suddenly. Besides, it gave his father more to do. Father adored nothing more than a good lecture. Standing, he set his water down, smoothed his suit, and headed over to shake the hands of their last guests. Turning to Zaid, he said, "I think the caterer is ready to shut it down, so we should probably call it a night. And please get yourselves back to your own rooms." Zaid frowned, but it was obvious Khalid wanted to leave. No doubt to have a long talk with his wife, who waited for him. Ahmed put on the innocent smile he had perfected over the years, as if he had no plans at all. But he was very much planning on an evening he would not soon forget. One with the lovely Melanie. Chapter 2. "You waited." Melanie couldn't hide the surprise or excitement in her voice when she found her gorgeous Sheikh waiting just outside the hotel. One look at him and she'd figured him as a flirt. He had that look in his eyes, part mischief and part trouble and way too attractive. She also knew her own weakness. She loved bad boys. He gave her an easy grin, one that had her heart speeding up and left her palms damp. "Did you think I wouldn't show?"
"Admittedly, yes. You seem the type who'd have a steady supply of women eager to spend time with you." His dark eyebrows pulled tight, and a touch of hurt lightened his eyes. She stared back at him, daring him to try a line on her. Slowly the spark came back into his eyes. He'd changed from his suit into jeans and a black polo that he wore open at the neck. She could see a touch of curling, dark chest hair peeking out and golden brown skin. His dark hair had a touch of wave in it and reached almost to his shoulders, framing his strong face. A neatly trimmed beard followed a firm jawline, emphasizing solid features. Earlier he'd looked bored, and she pegged him as the son who hated business, the playboy son. Now she wasn't so sure. There seemed to be hidden depths to Ahmed. He spread his hands wide.
"Well, I will admit that yes, most women seem to throw themselves at me." He paused to look her up and down. "I do enjoy a bit of a chase."
"So what? I'm a rabbit now?"
She mimicked his gaze, looking him over.
"To your wolf?"
Taking her arm, he led her to a black sedan that seemed to be waiting for them at the curb. "Well, you know what they say about rabbits."
Melanie blushed, but she met his stare. "What? They taste like chicken?"
He laughed. The driver held the door for them. She glanced at it. Was she ready for this? How long had it been since she'd last been on a date? She brushed at her black trousers. She hadn't even had a chance to change. She glanced back at Ahmed. She was pretty sure she could guess where this was heading. But, damn it, she was tired of being too responsible, too hard-working, and being the girl who never had any fun. Going out with Ahmed, a real prince, the son of the Sultan of Sharjah, was at least going to make for a great story someday. Weren't her friends always telling her she was always following the rules, and not really getting anywhere because of that? Throwing caution to the wind, she stepped into the car and slid across the back seat. The leather smelled new, gave like a dream, and there was enough room to almost call this a New York apartment. Ahmed slipped in beside her, saying, "Just so you know, I don't care for salad." She gave a laugh. "So, what did you have in mind?" She couldn't believe she was in the car with an Arabian sheik and suddenly realized her words sounded more like a come-on. "I mean, were you thinking pizza? We've got great Greek, but maybe that's too close to home." He smiled, and the leather creaked as he shifted a little closer. "I trust you haven't had dinner." Melanie glanced at the driver. Traffic was thick this time of night, and they'd be lucky to get into a good restaurant. "My dinner is usually leftovers from the trays we were serving." He shook his head. "That is not a meal. What if we have dinner prepared for us back at my personal suite by Michelin star chef Michael Stubon?"
"I thought you wanted a real New York experience."
"Is that not an experience? I'm sure it will be delightful."
"Sounds like it, and dinner prepared by Stubon is tempting. But I've got another idea." Leaning forward, she gave the driver the address to Katz's. The car pulled out into traffic, and the driver wove through the cars like a pro. Melanie glanced over to find Ahmed watching her. She was pretty sure he didn't know she wasn't just a worker at Catering. She owned the business, but he'd spoken to her as if she was just one of the staff members. She liked the idea of being Cinderella for an evening, with a real prince and everything. Depending on how things went, she'd decide later just what more he needed to know. So she asked him about his brothers, about his life back home, about his business interests in New York. He waved off the last question, talked with a touch of admiration about his two older brothers, as if he didn't want to admit he cared for them, even though he did. She thought she saw something more in him than just a playboy prince. But then he'd give her that crooked smile of his, the one that lit a slow light in his eyes, and she was pretty damn sure he was trouble on two legs. Muscles under the shirt suggested a body custom-made for sin. His dark eyes would be any girl's downfall, and the charm he had going was a weapon that would melt any woman's heart. Fun only, she reminded herself. She didn't need man trouble, but a fantasy night out was not a bad thing. The sedan pulled up in front of the address she'd given the driver. She got out without waiting for anyone to open the door. Ahmed frowned at that, but she came around, grabbed his hand, and pulled him into Katz's deli. The place was packed, but Katz's was generally packed at 4 in the morning or 4 in the afternoon. She dragged Ahmed to seats at the counter. He was glancing around as if he wasn't sure about any of this, but Sybil was working. The woman looked as if she'd been here for 60 years, and that might be the truth. "What do you have?" Sybil asked in a shout that carried over the clatter of dishes and the noise of the hard walls in the diner. Melanie glanced at Ahmed. He waved for her to go ahead. She ordered the pastrami on rye and knockwurst. There were other things on the menu that were a New York blessing, but Katz's pastrami was hand-sliced, perfectly seasoned, and just about melted in your mouth. Ahmed glanced around again, but no one was giving him more than a glance. Not with a lady in real diamonds and a fur, worn even on a summer evening, at one table in a hard-back chair. A few goth punks clinging to their outdated retro 80s look. A couple of taxi drivers who'd stopped in and sat near a window to keep an eye on their cab, and a few custom Brooks Brothers suits who looked like they were straight off Wall Street trading floors. Katz's catered to anyone with the money to buy a meal. Ahmed started to ask about herself, but the food came out on heavy china plates, served with coffee they hadn't ordered. Sybil liked to tell you what you needed with your meal. The bill was slapped down, and Melanie swapped half the pastrami onto the knockwurst plate. "Eat it while it's hot, like this." She cut off a hunk of his knockwurst and shoveled a forkful of bliss into her mouth. She closed her eyes and let the tastes wasp around her tongue. Crisp meat seasoned by a decades-old grill with a touch of grease. What was more New York than this? Opening her eyes, she saw Ahmed watching her, elbow propped on the counter and a smile curving his mouth. "You are a sensualist." She waved her fork at the plate. "And if you don't eat, Sybil is going to come over here and make sure you do. A growing man like you needs good food." He gave a laugh, but picked up half the pastrami sandwich, with its meat dripping out the sides. Melanie waited. Ahmed took a bite as if it was just food. Then he stopped, and his eyes widened. He chewed, and Melanie knew he was discovering the miracle of Katz's. It wasn't just that the meat was cooked to falling apart perfection, or that the rye bread came to the table soft and warm. It was the mustard and spices and how everything balanced. Ahmed let out a breath. "I see why everyone must come to New York at some time in their life." They ate everything, washed the meal down with hot coffee that Sybil kept steaming. She beamed at them to see them eating like teamsters. Ahmed paid the bill and left a more than generous tip that left Sybil calling after them to come back soon. Strolling out into the muggy evening air, Melanie pulled in a breath and put a hand on her stomach. "I'm going to have to do an extra lap at the pool this week to make up for that." Ahmed laughed. "Ah, but the evening is not done. Come, we'll walk." He took her hand and they strolled down the street. The sedan dutifully followed, slowing traffic behind them, gaining angry horn honks. Unable to stand that, Melanie said, "I should be getting back." "To work?" Ahmed turned to face her. "Really?" She bit her lower lip. "Hey, bills to pay." He glanced up at the sky and then at her. "You must come with me for a nightcap, yes? And I texted Stubon. He should leave dessert for us. You cannot let that go to waste." "Well, if you put it like that." With a hand on the small of her back, he guided her to the sedan, and Ahmed gave the name of a newer, smaller boutique hotel. Melanie had been curious about the place. She hadn't been inside. The lobby impressed with small alcoves and seating areas, all of them perfect for intimate business meetings. The bar had been tucked to one side, and the check-in counter seemed more like a desk. The elevator smoothly took them to an upper story, and Ahmed let himself into his room. She was even more impressed that he hadn't bothered with bodyguards, but with his build, he probably knew how to look after himself. The Sheikh's suite put the penthouse where they'd held the business gathering to shame. A small foyer opened into a large sitting room with tall, two-story windows looking out onto a terrace that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Stairs led up to a loft-style second floor with a hint of a giant bed. The dining room boasted a long, shiny ebony table surrounded by straight-backed chairs, formally set with china, chilling wine, and candles that had just been lit. The room still smelled of spices and something else. But the award-winning chef who had prepared whatever meal was not to be served was nowhere to be seen. She hoped he hadn't left in a huff. But the lights of the city distracted her, and she headed to the windows. Wow, you can see everything worth seeing, even the Empire State Building. At street level, it's too easy to forget the light show that stretches across the skyscrapers as soon as the sun goes down.
A commanding view, yes?
He sounded proud of the fact, as if somehow he'd arranged this just for her. In a way, he had. Pulling out a chair, he gave a small bow.
Please, have a seat.
Turning, Melanie glanced at the table and came over to it. She could smell vanilla, and a hint of spice clung to the air, cinnamon and clove. She sat down, and Ahmed pulled a bottle of wine from the table to fill 2 glasses. He handed one glass of the golden liquid to her.
Here's to a wonderful night, he said, holding up his glass.
She raised her glass. Cheers, she answered. She sniffed and sipped the wine. Dry, but with an oaky aroma and a smooth finish. She gave a low hum of appreciation.
You are familiar with Montrachet? Ahmed asked.
I worked a diamond wedding anniversary, and the husband not only could afford the world's best Chardonnay, he was liberal with servings. It's fantastic. I only tasted it that once, but I swore I'd be able to afford a bottle someday. He smiled and sat. Dessert turned out to be custard that had been left on ice at the table. That's where the smells were coming from. A bowl of fresh raspberries sat beside the custard, revealed only when Ahmed whisked away the silver covers that had been hiding the delicacies. Each bowl of custard sat in its own small ice bucket. He served her, and she dove in. She'd never been one to pass up a dessert. Closing her eyes, she let the mix of vanilla and spices roll around her mouth. She caught a faint hint not just of clove, but a touch of brandy in the custard. Just a faint taste. It was perfect. She instantly wanted the recipe.
Good?
Ahmed asked. She nodded, a hand over her mouth. She swallowed and said, Perfect. I almost hate to spoil the custard with fruit, but I need to try it that way too.
I'm glad you're enjoying yourself.
He couldn't have sounded more satisfied with himself if he'd cooked it himself. They ate and sipped the wine, which worked perfectly to clear the palate and add complexity to the dessert. She asked him what he'd seen of New York, and she was shocked that he'd seen nothing. How long have you been here? He shrugged.
2 days of meeting after meeting after meeting. My brothers drag me from one office tower to another. I don't even get glimpses, since I'm usually in the middle of our limo.
She stared at her empty bowl and wrapped a hand around the stem of her wine glass. He'd given her a lovely evening, and it had been fun. She had precious little of that in her life. Looking up at him, she gave a nod. Okay, you get 2 days. I'm not booked, and I'll have to make a few calls, but we can do the Brooklyn Bridge, Statue of Liberty, and the 9/11 Memorial tomorrow. And a play. You have to take in a play if you're in New York. The day after, we'll stroll Central Park, eat hot dogs, and hit the Met. He stared at her, eyes dark and wide. He didn't say anything. She turned her wine glass a few times. That is, I mean, if you want, and you can get the time. He put his hand over hers.
I will make the time.
Your brothers? Your business? It'll be okay?" He gave a nod.
"If you can make the time to show me your New York, I can make the time to be a gracious guest. But only if, in turn, you will allow me to pamper you as you never have been before. The best food, the finest clothes. You have but to ask for anything, and I will grant it to you. For 2 days." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss onto her palm. "For 2 days we will belong to each other. We will enjoy life, yes?" Melanie's hand tingled under his touch. Her palm dampened, and her pulse thudded quick and hard. She parted her lips and sucked in a breath. She'd always been the girl who always played by the rules, and where had that gotten her? Well, the business would be fine for 2 days. George, her assistant, would see to that. 2 whole days of fun. 2 days of being a guide for a sheik and being treated like a princess. It was a better deal than any Cinderella had ever had. Turning her hand in his, she gripped his tightly. "And let's enjoy each other without any unnecessary complications." He ran his thumb over the back of her fingers. He stood and pulled her to her feet. "That is a deal I am more than happy to make." Pulling her close, he kissed her. Chapter 3. She tasted of vanilla and wine, and she parted her lips for him, invited him to do more than take a small sample. She came into his arms, willing, her slender body pliant and warm. Wrapping her arms around his neck, she pulled him closer. Ah, but she was heaven. She was demanding and like nothing he had ever known. He lost track of time, lost track of everything except her, the feel of her in his arms, the softness of her mouth, the sharp edge of her teeth. He almost forgot to breathe. She pulled back slightly and stepped from his arms, her eyes glinting. Picking up her glass, she drained the last bit of her wine, tipping her head back and exposing her throat to him. "I'm not wasting an ounce of a Montrachet." He laughed, poured the last of the wine into her glass, and the last of his wine, too. Taking her free hand, he pulled her with him, up the stairs and to the loft bedroom. She came with him, her steps only a little dragging. The maids had turned down the bed and had left only one light on. Below, in the main room, the drapes hung open, giving a view of the lights of New York, and light floated up from the open dining room. Melanie glanced around, took a sip of wine, and wet her lips. "I've never been someone to jump into a one-night stand." She lifted a hand and fluttered her fingers. "Good." He came to her and put his hands on her waist. "Now I wish for the dessert I have been wanting all evening." Taking the wine from her, he set the glass on a night table. He unbuttoned her shirt, pressing a kiss on each inch of skin revealed. She sucked in a breath. Straightening, he pulled her closer. She was trembling. He shifted and urged her onto the bed. She lay down, her hair spilling around her face. He took a moment just to admire the breasts now straining against a very practical white cotton bra. She lifted a foot. "Shoes?" With a smile, he pulled off her shoes, something flat and sensible. The black sock followed, and then he had her foot in his hand. She had lovely feet. He stroked his fingers over a high arch. She didn't paint her toenails. Putting down one foot, he took up the other and pulled off the shoe and sock, and then he leaned forward and unbuttoned and unzipped her pants.
Sorry, readers. Here's where we fade to black due to YouTube explicit content guidelines. If you dream for the steam, you'll need to take a look in the book.
She gave a soft hum and asked, "How soon can we do that again?" He stroked a hand down his sensual American's back. "Drink your wine, and then we will go again. And tomorrow you may show me New York."
Chapter 4. They had sex 5 times that night, barely getting any sleep, but Melanie felt oddly energized. The next morning she'd called George to ask him to keep an eye on the business and do the inventory they did after any event. George had given a low laugh and said she sounded like she was getting some, and he'd handle everything. He sounded pleased she was trusting him enough to give him more responsibility. Ahmed had done a few texts, and then they'd showered, had breakfast, more sex in the living room, this time doggy style that had her coming with gasps. She'd never had a lover like Ahmed, and the things that beard of his did to her skin were probably illegal in 5 states. Then they'd set off to see sights. They'd done more than that. Ahmed insisted she buy a few dresses, and then he'd bought her flowers. She'd left them at the 9/11 memorial, and they'd gone window shopping, and she'd bought him a small Statue of Liberty as a souvenir. The theater last night had been amazing. Ahmed had gotten them front-row seats to Hamilton, and she'd never had seats so good. Afterwards, she'd finally had that dinner in his suite, but they'd ended up naked and eating dinner off each other's bodies before collapsing into bed. They'd woken late. She'd barely had the energy to crawl into a bath. Ahmed had joined her and scrubbed her back, along with a few other parts that had left her gripping the edge of the tub and gasping as she came. Right now, the sun was out, and the day was just starting to get muggy. They were supposed to hit the museums, but Central Park had been too tempting. A light breeze stirred the air, and they were eating ice cream and walking near Artists' Gate. The artists were out with their easels and chalk or watercolors to work, or with a display of their work for sale. Ahmed kept one hand on the small of her back, and Melanie wasn't sure if she liked that almost possessive touch. It was nice, but it was also possessive. And this was a fantasy, and nothing that would last. That was a good thing. A few more days of this and she'd fall apart. "Why don't you have a husband?" Ahmed asked. She gave a shrug. "I did the usual. Boyfriends in high school and college. But culinary school didn't leave me much time, and then I got a job as a line cook in the restaurant of one of my teachers. That sucked up so much of my time that the boyfriends would come and go, just about literally." Ahmed shook his head. "They were fools." She laughed. "I can't really blame them. If they hadn't left, I'd probably have dumped them. Relationships can get in the way of what you want." She glanced sideways at him and tipped her head to one side. He'd bought them cones. Hers was strawberry, and he'd gone for plain vanilla, which so wasn't him in bed. No, he was something exotic and exciting, and she almost didn't want this to end. But it would. Soon. "Which brings us to what is it you really want?" she asked. She took the last bite of her cone and turned to him, touching one hand to his face, running her fingers over his close-trimmed beard. "This is our last night. Tomorrow it's back to work for me. And you." He pulled a face. "Yes, my brothers have been filling my cell phone with texts and calls I have not answered, and now I hear my father wishes me to return home." "Really?" He tossed the rest of his ice cream into a nearby trash can and took her hands. "I will go when I am ready, and I am not certain I am ready to give you up, Melanie." She laughed and pulled away from him. "Ready or not, we both have lives waiting for us. This Cinderella turns back into a pumpkin tonight, and you still haven't told me what it is you really want." Turning, but keeping hold of one hand, he waved at the artists around them. "How many of these painters will make a living from what they do?" She glanced around at them, figuring most worked other jobs. "Does it matter if they're doing what they love?" "Ah, but they must eat and pay the rent. The lucky ones do more than that, and that is my gift." She laughed again and shook her head. "You're lucky? That is not a skill." "But it is. It is why my brothers drag me here, and why my father encourages me to do more, even though I do not need to. I have a nose for the lucky deal. I can look at a building, and a tingle in my gut tells me it will become popular enough that the rents will go up. I look at land and know it will have oil or water. I read up on a company, and some sense tells me its stock will go up. I just know. My father does not approve of stock markets. He calls them gambling." "Which is close enough to true.
My uncle dabbled in stocks and lost his retirement.
Ah, but he was not me. It is business if you buy smart and sell smarter.
She tipped her head to one side and brushed back a strand of hair. So, this is all your own money you've been using for our escape? She wasn't sure she believed that, but it had been pure joy not to worry about the cost of those theater tickets or the price of any meal. Ahmed let go of her hand and spread his hands wide. He gave her a grin that made him suddenly seem boyish and far too charming.
Of course. And some day I will have enough money that he can leave his businesses to my brothers, and I will go on doing what I do, investing with some luck and some skill.
He glanced around.
I may even invest in New York real estate. A gallery, perhaps.
He glanced at her.
Or a restaurant.
She put up a hand. Oh, no, don't look at me for that. I know just what a nightmare that can be. I really would like a life someday, and a restaurant won't give me that.
You sound very certain.
He took her hand again. She pressed her lips tight. She wasn't going to ruin their last day by digging up a painful memory. He tugged on her fingers.
Let's skip the museum and go back to the hotel. Our 2 days are almost up.
No, you have to at least see some of the Met. You can't come to New York without that. He frowned, and she liked that small pout he was giving her, but she wasn't giving up on the Met. The sedan that Ahmed kept at his beck and call waited for them at the edge of the park. It dropped them off at the Met, and Melanie dragged Ahmed inside. He scoffed at the antiquities.
Old stone. We have such carvings and statues all over my part of the world.
She took him instead to the modern art wing. He liked that more, wondered at the price of a Picasso, and said,
Art would be a good investment. I really must look into a gallery in New York. And yes, it will have a cafe next door, too.
He gave her a long look, but she wouldn't be drawn back into talking about that idea. She'd had enough of trying to make a go of a restaurant in New York. She was also too aware of him, his scent, his body, his touch. Since meeting him, she'd had more fantasies come to life than she'd thought possible. He could just look at her with those hot, dark eyes, and she'd start to get wet. Even though they'd had each other just about every way possible, she wanted to get back to the hotel room with him. One more night. That was all they had. George had already texted her a dozen questions, and she could easily imagine he was having trouble juggling the clients they were trying to line up for 2 weddings in the fall, and the holidays needed to be booked, and suppliers would be calling for orders and payment. But she wanted this last evening with Ahmed. He turned now, saw her looking at him, and a smile curved his lips.
The hotel. Are you hungry again?
Always, she said. The sedan took them back. They didn't bother with dinner, but started to strip each other as soon as the door closed behind them. Ahmed walked her out onto the terrace, shedding clothes as they went. And just where are you taking me? She asked. Do you know where the bedroom is?
Who needs a bed?
She shivered. Hard to snuggle outside. He laughed, took her hand, and led her up the stairs to the loft overlooking the rest of his suite. At the top of the stairs, he turned her around and kissed her, his lips soft. He held her face in his hands, and she felt herself melt. She reached for the buttons on his vest, opening it and sliding it off his shoulders. He pulled one hand away, then the other, letting it fall to the floor. He'd worn just the light jacket, trousers, and an open-neck shirt. She had on the summer dress he'd bought for her, something silk, splashed with color like a garden, and ridiculously expensive. She reached for the straps, but he kept his hand on hers. Keep it on.
Sorry, readers. Here's where we fade to black due to YouTube explicit content guidelines. If you dream for the steam, you'll need to take a look in the book.
When Melanie could drag her eyes open, she was lying on the bed, Ahmed on top of her, almost crushing her. For once, it felt good. It felt right. She shifted, and he rolled off her. He cursed slightly, and she lifted up on an elbow. What is it?
Nothing.
He stroked a hand down her back.
I am sure it will be fine. He tossed something aside, but she couldn't think right now, couldn't focus. Sweat slicked her back, her stomach, and her thighs. She felt wet, like pasta cooked too long. She collapsed back onto the soft sheets. Ahmed flung a hand over her, resting his palm on her ass. She reached up and pushed her fingers through her hair. "It's back to real life for us tomorrow," she muttered. Ahmed gave a grunt in reply. Melanie vowed she'd be up first in the morning. She'd leave the clothes he'd bought her, wear her pants and white shirt out of here. She had a business to run, and it was time for Cinderella to get back to her ashes. Chapter 5. Ahmed stared off into the distance, only half listening to his father's lecture and thinking far too much about his sensual American. It had been almost a month since they had shared 2 wonderful days. Ahmed had stayed in New York for another week, listening to too many complaints from his older brothers, attending dull business meetings, and slipping in trips to look over New York real estate. He hadn't found anything that set his pulse to hammering, not the way his Melanie had. He hadn't been able to get her out of his mind. He also hadn't been able to contact her. She had been gone when he'd woken after their second night. He'd had no time to tell her the condom had broken during that last vigorous bout of sex. He'd called her firm and had left a message for Melanie to call him, but she had not. Which meant the broken condom must not matter. Nothing had come of it, and Melanie was done with him. His mouth twitched down. She had made it clear she wanted 2 days with him and nothing more. She had even left behind the clothes he had bought just for her. That rankled. He did not want a woman who only wanted him for his money, but he did want a woman he could pamper and fuss over. He had vowed he was not done with his sensual American. But then his father had insisted that Ahmed return home. He'd put off the trip as long as he could, had used the excuse of business, but eventually even his brothers insisted he must go. "Father has plans for you," Khalid had said. His expression had been grim, and that had sent a shiver of alarm down Ahmed's spine. However, he was wondering now why he'd been worried. His father was droning on and on about Ahmed's poor behavior, as usual. Ahmed had kissed an American, a congressman's daughter, a girl barely 18. Ahmed had stiffened at that comment. His father would hate even more to learn of Ahmed's sensual American and their 2 days of pleasure. But then his father started into the usual complaint of how Ahmed was not growing up, not taking responsibility, not involved in business enough. As if there was room for Ahmed when his older brothers had everything so well handled. Ahmed stared out the window to a stark blue sky and the white walls of the palace and the lush gardens in the courtyard, but he kept thinking of green eyes and a slender, sensual woman. His father's voice sharpened, and Ahmed glanced at the man. His father was looking older, a little more gray in his hair and his beard, a few more lines around his dark eyes. And what was he talking about now? About how marriage and a family would make Ahmed grow up, would give him a better sense of responsibility? That old tale. Ahmed let out a long breath, and then his father said, "Marriage is the answer, and she will make you a good wife." Ahmed sat up. For an instant he thought his father was speaking of Melanie, and the image flashed in front of him of her dark hair and those amazing green eyes. He shook his head. Melanie wanted marriage as little as did Ahmed, and his father did not know about the sensual American. His father was also looking pleased. Something was wrong here. "Mary!" Ahmed spat out the word. "Father, what have you done?" His father leaned his elbows on the desk. He had worn traditional garb, as usual, the white robes and the keffiyeh scarf, fastened with a black igal. The end of the keffiyeh swung forward. "I have settled your future. Yafasa has agreed to wed his Nasiji to you. It is settled." He sliced a hand through the air. Ahmed stood. "Nothing is settled. I have no wish to marry." His father stood and leaned his hands on his oak desk.
"You wish to shame our name. And what of Nasiji? You will leave her disgraced, abandoned by the man meant to be her husband. Who will have her then?"
Ahmed crossed his arms. "This arrangement is not my doing, so you may undo it."
"Impossible."
Al-Qasimi straightened.
"I have already given my word on this matter."
He clapped his hands. The door behind Ahmed opened, and he turned. A woman in a full black burqa entered, her head and figure covered, but her eyes visible. Her deep, mesmerizing green eyes. However, they were not Melanie's eyes. Ahmed knew that in an instant. She gave a nod, and Ahmed's father strode toward the door.
"I leave you to work out the details, but this marriage will take place."
He paused in front of Ahmed.
"Do not bring shame to my family or to hers, or I shall not just disown you, but I will see the two of you whipped and bring the full force of my power against you."
He strode from the room. Ahmed fisted his hands. He turned and started to leave, but Nasiji touched his arm. "Please, Ahmed, I do not wish this either, but we have no choice." Stopping, gut churning and his skin hot, Ahmed glanced at her. "This is your father's doing, and mine?" He'd known Nasiji for most of his life. At one point he'd even had an infatuation with her younger sister, but that had fallen apart horribly. She pushed back the veil, giving him a better look at her face. He could see she was as displeased as he was about their arrangement. She sat down on one of the stiff-backed chairs in his father's sparse and functional office. "I have no alternative. My father, he is old. He fears he has spoiled me, allowed me to become too Western, so he thinks now that marriage and a traditional life will cure all. He and your father cooked this up, and when I protested—" "You did?" Ahmed sat in the chair next to hers. "I did, and I feared my father would have a stroke. Ahmed, I cannot risk his life to defy him. I would never forgive myself. And, well, I see no other future. My father will see me married before he dies. He wishes for grandchildren." Ahmed nodded. "As does my father. My brother has already started on this task, but a dozen grandchildren will not satisfy my father." Nasiji gave a small smile. "Would it be so bad to marry me?" Ahmed took a deep breath. "Nasiji, you are a beautiful woman. You come from a wealthy family and would make any man a wonderful wife." "But I hear that word coming from your lips even though you have not said it, Ahmed." He stood and walked to the windows. Stuffing his hands in his pockets, he turned back to face her. "I met someone in New York, an American." Her mouth pulled down. "Who is this woman?" Ahmed blinked. He realized then that he knew her only as Melanie. But it would take no great effort to learn her name and more about her. He knew she worked for the company hired by his brothers to cater the New York event. He frowned. Nasiji stood, came to his side, and touched his arm again. "I will not be a demanding wife. If you wish to make trips to New York, I will not ask questions. I only ask that I be allowed to have a life, too." Pulling away, Ahmed shook his head. "That may be a marriage to satisfy you, but it will not do for me." Her face paled. "So you will deny me? Leave me to face the wrath of your father and mine? I know you can leave, but I cannot." Tears shimmered in her eyes. She was a lovely woman, with golden skin and high cheekbones, a lush mouth, and huge eyes. However, Ahmed couldn't help but compare her to his sensual American. Nasiji was a serious girl, with a stubborn chin and a temper. She was not the woman for him, and they both knew it. He shook his head. "Nasiji, you would not be happy with me." "And I will be happy to be whipped and branded an undutiful daughter? To be left no choice but to be given to an old man with bad teeth and the habits of a donkey? My father has vowed I will marry this year. If not to you, then to some old cousin of his who has 3 wives already, and I will never be allowed to do more than breed babies. That is, if the old man can even get it up."
Ahmed let out a laugh, and Nasiji glared at him. "Sorry, I should not laugh, but your language... And your father would do it, wouldn't he? Beat you and then marry you off just so he could think he had secured your future and be at peace with himself." Nasiji nodded. "And your father would cut you off, see you in jail even. He will not allow you to dishonor his given word." Ahmed waved away such an idea. "I have more freedom than you, Nasiji. I can leave, make my own way in this world. If I must forever leave my home, I would do so. But I see how it is for you. We must find you a better husband, I think, and a way out of this for both of us that will not anger our fathers, but will leave them pleased to have averted disaster. Perhaps there is even a way to get you to New York, or to some place in America where you can have the life you want." The tears vanished from her eyes, leaving Ahmed wondering just how genuine they had been. "You have an idea?" she asked. Ahmed looked into Nasiji's now hardened eyes, hard as stone. He wondered if he was mad to even toy with the idea that had sprouted in his mind. But it was not just his future at stake. It was Nasiji's. He had to help her. The long friendship between their families meant he owed her that much, and this idea of his would bring his sensual American back into his life. What happened after that? Well, he'd always hoped to be his own man. Now he was going to have to prove it. He would need his Melanie's help with that, if she would give it. Chapter 6. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Melanie did a slow circle in the middle of the spotlessly clean, relentlessly top-of-the-line, enormous kitchen of the Sultan of Sharjah. Stainless steel freezers, Aga stoves, marble pastry station, a wall of walk-in fridges, and spice racks stocked with everything a chef could want, not to mention the stacks of bowls, trays, and every possible mixer or appliance she could want. She hadn't even dug into the full list of tools available. Here was the chance to finally get her catering company, Catering, into the headlines, and she had Ahmed to thank for this. She was still a little worried about meeting him again. George had taken the call and had booked the event, just about pushing Melanie onto the first plane out of JFK. "It's the Emirate of Sharjah, Melanie. A royal family, an unlimited budget, and a spread in People magazine," George had told her. He'd packed her knives, his hands shaking. She'd protested that she needed backup, but George told her he'd get Angie, Sid, and Terry onto the very next plane, and Melanie could buy what she needed. He'd ship her anything else, like himself and whatever staff she had to import. Meantime, he was clearing the calendar for the next month. A month, just to plan one event. Melanie put a hand on her stomach. The nausea caught at her again, just as it had the past few mornings. If she didn't know any better, she'd suspect something was up. She was a few days late with her period, but she'd always been a little irregular. And she knew damn well that Ahmed had used protection every single time. She'd seen, felt, and heard the evidence. Still, that last time, she'd felt a spurt of wetness inside. She frowned. She didn't have time to deal with complications right now, so it'd just have to wait. This had to be jet lag puffing up her ankles and nerves twisting her stomach. She'd been met at the airport by a harried-looking wedding planner who had introduced herself as Madame Zoleste. The name left the woman sounding more like a fortune-teller, but the Chanel suit, the ruthlessly slim and stylish dress, and diamond studs all said Zoleste knew her business and made a fortune at it. Zoleste had led Melanie to a car, said she had underlings meeting Melanie's staff, and started with the requirements for the bride and groom. Melanie's stomach had jumped at those words. A part of her was hoping it was Ahmed's other brother, or a cousin, who was getting married. But she had to face the truth. She might have been his last-minute fling. She needed to focus on the job, the money, and the fact that this was going to launch her company into being in demand by the wealthiest clients in the world. There was nothing but upside on this. So why were her hands shaking worse than George's had been? Angie, Sid, and Terry burst into the kitchen, chattering like the college students they had been up until a few months ago. George called them the Three Musketeers. They were her go-to team, and she clapped her hands, got their attention, and put them to work. Today, they had to prep 3 rounds of tester foods for the bride and groom, samples that would showcase options for the menu and confirm she could handle the job. Madame Celeste had said she'd be doing the first tasting before anything went out to the happy couple, and Celeste hadn't sounded happy or confident that Melanie could deliver. She was going to blow Celeste out of the water. Today it was all about hors d'oeuvres. Sid was working on the spiced plantains, crispy fried bananas with a sweet curry spice, and an alotica, spiced chicken done in a cube on a stick. Angie was making spicy tuna in a hand-rolled miso seaweed cone, a seared hamachi and fish tacos in wonton shells. Terry had the hard job, an array of wood-fired mini-pizzas, with toppings ranging from caviar to roasted vegetables. As a nod to tradition, Melanie was going to do a hand-held shawarma. The lamb was almost done roasting and filled the kitchen with the aroma and fresh pita that was cooling right now, and dates stuffed with a goat cheese, walnut, and honey mixture. Those were already made and on a tray in a cooler to get them to the perfect temperature. She stopped by the stations to see how everyone was doing. Sid flashed her a quick smile, Angie was biting her lower lip in concentration, and Terry was humming. A good sign. Madame Celeste poked her head in twice, sniffed, frowned, and left. Maybe she wasn't a lamb fan. When the samples were ready, Melanie gave the trays one last look. Plating was as important as taste. Everything looked beautiful, and smelled even better. Taking a deep breath, she had Sid and Terry pick up the tray, and Angie held open the door. They headed into the dining room. She'd seen it before. Madame Celeste had given her a blurry, fast tour. The palace seemed all white walls, a lot of marble, heavy portraits, and gold leaf. The dining table could host a state dinner, meaning it would seat 300 comfortably. But Melanie almost stumbled into a huge Chinese vase when Ahmed looked up from the table. Next to him sat a woman in a black burqa, her head covered but her face revealed, and she was beautiful. Exotic and beautiful, and Melanie suddenly felt skinny and far too much the tomboy she'd once been. Ahmed was the groom. She blinked. Her chest seemed too tight, with a breath caught that she couldn't dislodge. Her skin chilled, and the nausea lifted again. But she had a job to do. She pushed back her shoulders. They hadn't made promises to each other. It had been a fling. She glanced at the bride. With her mouth turned down and her dark eyes snapping, the woman didn't look happy. Just what was going on here? Ahmed looked. Well, he looked better than ever in a tailored suit and with his smooth, dark features. His seductive eyes held a gleam she didn't trust. She put on a smile and concentrated on the professional demeanor she'd worked so hard to cultivate. Melanie explained the samples as Sid and Terry served them. Her stomach churned and her heart pounded as she watched Ahmed and his fiancée try a bite of this or that. Well, if her fling had gotten her this job, that was great. But if Ahmed thought they were going to keep things going while he got married, he was going to have a few things explained to him. But this didn't seem to be a happy couple. The woman, Nasiji, Ahmed called her at one point, hated the fish, loved the shawarma, and couldn't make up her mind about the dates. Ahmed kept saying, "Whatever pleases you," but his tone was such that it sounded more like he was running out of patience. Madame Celeste started to look more harried. No wonder, since this looked like a wedding about to blow up. What was going on? Ahmed avoided looking at her now, and that was a good thing. She wanted the focus to be the food, but the polite bickering at the table. Nasiji managed to be difficult with passive-aggressive perfection, and Ahmed's clipped tones were giving the wedding planner a heart attack. Overwhelmed everything. Nothing was decided, and Madame Celeste excused Melanie and her staff with a nod and a wave of her hand. Melanie went, grateful to head back to the kitchen. Once there, Sid voiced the question Melanie had been thinking. Are those two going to get married or kill each other? After Melanie and her staff had left, Ahmed stood and towered over Nasiji. They still had the wedding planner with them, so the show must go on. I thought you wished an impressive menu.
You suggested this caterer, and what is wrong with a more traditional wedding? Nasiji's voice hit a whine that almost had Ahmed walking from the room. How the woman managed to be a scold without ever scolding was a wonder. He now pitied the man who would ever wed her, for she would rule him without ever raising her voice. But he had a role to play here.
I know I did, he said. He'd used this wedding as an excuse to bring Melanie to him. He hadn't expected that jolt of attraction to shake him so strongly. He hadn't thought he would instantly want her in his arms. She'd felt so good, so right. He wanted that again, but he had this damnable role to play. He cut the air with a hand, a gesture his father adored. I will go ask if she can prepare more traditional dishes.
Not too traditional,
Nasiji said, her voice hitting that note that had his skin wanting to crawl off his body.
I do not want us to appear backward to the world.
Ahmed heard the wedding planner mutter, Traditional, but not too traditional. The woman wiped a hand over her forehead. Well, she was being well paid, wedding or no. Nasiji stood, her robe swirling around her ankles.
The caterer has traveled around the world to take this job. We can't possibly send her back now. She is doing something many women here will only ever dream of doing, running a company.
She looked at the wedding planner.
We'll hire her and work with her on the menu.
Ahmed raised both eyebrows. I don't remember agreeing with you.
Ah, so you would like to tell her that she's wasted her time here.
Ahmed glanced at the wedding planner. He couldn't remember the woman's name, but he knew she would report back to his father. The woman's face had paled. He looked back at Nasiji and frowned. Whatever you wish.
Nasiji smiled. I knew you'd come to your senses.
Ahmed headed for the kitchen. He would at least see Melanie again, and he had to figure out some time to speak with her in private.
Chapter 7. Ahmed strode into the kitchen as if he owned the place, which he sort of did, or at least his father did. Melanie's staff froze, and she turned to face him. Was he going to fire her? The tasting hadn't gone as expected. She'd been hoping a couple of dishes would be discarded and a few chosen. Instead, she had no idea what to do for this wedding. Traditional, but not too traditional? What did that even mean? Glancing around, Ahmed saw her and came to her. He offered up that charming smile of his, and Melanie instantly went on guard.
You and your staff will stay at the palace. You will have access to the gym, pool, library, and, of course, the kitchen. A car and driver is at your disposal. I trust you will be comfortable.
Melanie was waiting for the catch. What was the idea here? Was Ahmed expecting to have her be in a bedroom next to his? A hotel will be
too far.
He took her hand.
I hope you will join me for dinner.
She tried to pull away, but he had a firm grip on her fingers. She tugged. He frowned and held on and leaned closer.
We need to speak.
She gave up. He was right about that. Thank you, she said, and kept the words flat. She was not going to help him cheat on his wife. Not before the wedding and not after. Ahmed gave her another charming smile that had her pulse kicking up. Tugging, Melanie got her hand back and turned to her staff. All right, she said, clapping her hands. Let's get to it. With Ahmed gone, she and her staff set to cleaning up, and Melanie let herself think about the job she'd accepted. Why had Ahmed brought her here? What did he want to talk to her about? What was going to happen between them? Should she just quit? But she couldn't do that. It would leave her company's reputation in shreds to bail on a job like this. But how was she going to keep Ahmed at arm's length? The man had charm enough to get any woman in his bed. She straightened and rubbed at her lower back, which was aching. She'd just have to cope. She'd been in worse spots, after all. Sid, Terry, and Angie finished up. They were eager to see their rooms, hit the pool, and maybe take the car and driver out to see the sights. Melanie glanced around. The kitchen was once again spotless. She gave them the go to head out, with a caution to get some sleep.
"Tomorrow I'm working on new menus," she warned them. They left with Sid and Terry grinning, and a serious nod from Angie. Melanie headed for the outside, and it took 3 corridors and 5 doors to find it. The palace wasn't just lush, it was huge and a maze of rooms. Thankfully, there seemed to be servants, maids in neat uniforms and security men in suits that did nothing to hide their muscles, almost everywhere. A few even spoke a little English. Outside, the heat of the day hit like an oven door opening. She leaned against the wall, thinking about the money this was going to bring into her catering business. If she could just focus on that and not Ahmed's smile, or the way he moved, or how it had felt with their bodies wrapped together, maybe she could get through this month. "Melanie Martin." The voice, low and soft and male, jerked her out of her thoughts. She turned to see a man in the traditional long white robes and headscarf fastened with a black band that she'd seen many men in Sharjah wearing. He had dark, reddish skin and light amber eyes that almost looked like those of a lion's. He wasn't one of the Sultan's sons. She'd met all of them in New York, so maybe he was a cousin or something. "Yes," she fixed a smile in place. He'd seemed to come from nowhere. She glanced around, wishing one of the security men would show up. This guy had bulk and muscle under his robes and a vaguely threatening feel to him. She'd lived in New York long enough to know trouble when it was headed her way. He stopped in front of her. He smelled of sweat and garlic, but his English was perfect when he said, "I have a business proposition for you." She doubted that his definition of business was the same as hers. He'd also put himself between her and the door back into the palace. She wasn't in any position to try to fight off a man in Sharjah. As a foreigner, she knew she had to walk a very thin, straight, and narrow line of behavior. As a woman, that line would be even thinner. She lifted her eyebrows, crossed her arms over her chest, and waited. Her heart was thudding hard, but she was going to try to go for cool. "You are vital to this wedding. The caterer." He made a face as if he had tasted something sour. "These arranged marriages, not something you Americans practice. Sadly, we do, and that is where you could be of help. All you need to do is be what anyone would expect, a temperamental chef who demands the finest ingredients, exotic fruits that must be special ordered, unusual, hard-to-get fish and spices." "You want me to delay the event?" Melanie asked, staring at him. "A few days only, until after the last day of June. And for this, $100,000 will be transferred into a Swiss bank account in your name." Melanie stilled. She swallowed. "That's a lot of money. Do you mind if I ask why?" He lifted a hand. "Think of it as, well, an astrologer looking for an auspicious date." She narrowed her eyes. "Really? Seriously? And why haven't you approached the family to mention this?" His smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "You ask a number of questions." Melanie propped a hand on her hip. "Look, buddy, I've had to deal with New York Teamsters. I can hear a threat even when it's not mentioned." His smile widened to flash white teeth. "Not at all. I merely make an offer. And what harm could it possibly cause?" Tempting as it was to tell the guy to go to hell, Melanie was certain he'd only find someone else to try and bribe. If she agreed, she'd be able to tell Ahmed about this, and she'd decide later if this really was a wedding that needed to be delayed or not. She gave a nod. "I'll do what I can." She put one hand behind her back and crossed her fingers. And she hoped she hadn't just agreed to something that wouldn't just put off a wedding, but which might end her career and hurt Ahmed. Chapter 8. Ahmed sat at the dining table, drumming his fingers on the hard wood. Plates had been set out, and they were to taste dishes today, but he had no appetite. He had wanted to see Melanie, but so far that was proving difficult. She always seemed to have her staff with her, would not dismiss them, and if that was not difficult enough, Nasiji kept after him to do something to end this farce of an engagement. She worried too much, and he kept telling her to trust in him, but she would simply give him accusing looks. At least his plans were advancing. Khalid and Zaid had both already remarked that it seemed as if Nasiji was the rule in this relationship. Each time Ahmed had shrugged and spread his hands. "What can I do? Father wishes me to marry her, so I must. And what she wishes, well, I do not want a shrew of a wife, and so I live now to please her." He had walked away, but he knew they would carry stories to his father, and his father was not a man who believed that any woman should rule a house. It was step one to making Nasiji seem an undesirable daughter-in-law. Now for step two. But first he must try the dishes. At least this might lead to a chance for him to talk to his sensual American. However, Melanie's staff brought out the messe, or appetizers, the traditional but not too traditional foods. He raised an eyebrow at that. If Melanie thought to avoid him today, she was wrong. He tasted the dishes. Wonderful, all of them, but that was not part of the plan. He made faces at everything. The za'atar, a blend of thyme, sumac, and sesame seeds, was too dry. The hummus had too much tahini. Things were too traditional or not enough. He bickered with Nasiji over every little thing. Ahmed stood and threw down his napkin. "That was terrible." "Perhaps the next item?" the wedding planner said. She was fidgeting nervously with a tablet computer. Ahmed shot her a glare, and she paled. He crossed his arms. "I refuse to sample another dish until I speak with the caterer. None of this is good enough." Nasiji stood as well. "Why don't you like it? Is it because I do? You're saying I have no taste in food? That I will try to poison you?" Nasiji picked up the edge of her veil. "How dare you embarrass me like this?" She turned and stomped from the room. Ahmed called after her, "And how dare you embarrass me?" Nasiji slammed the door behind her. Ahmed turned and found that skinny wedding planner staring at him as if she was watching her wedding plans dissolving. Good. He hoped they were. He fought down a smile, fixed what he hoped was a stern frown in place, and started for the kitchen. "I will speak with the caterer myself." He found Melanie leaning over the sink in a bathroom that stood just off the kitchen. It was easy enough to find her due to the running water. She was wetting a cloth to put over the back of her neck. He came up behind her and took it from her. She glanced up, her face pale, but she allowed him to help her. "What is it?" he asked, voice soft. "You look terrible." She glanced up into the mirror as if to check herself, and put a hand up to her hair, as if self-conscious now that the usual sleek cap was disordered. Ahmed put the damp cloth on the back of her neck. "Flu?" he asked. "No, I'm okay." She straightened and brushed at the front of her white shirt. She wore, as did her staff, a white button-down shirt, black trousers, and sensible black shoes. He expected that under that would again be her sensible bra and panties. A memory flashed of her naked in bed and his skin heated. He put a hand to her face. She was warm, too. She took a step back, removing herself from his reach. This bathroom, like all those in the palace, was large enough she could do so. "I think it's the water. It doesn't agree with me." Her eyes were watering. Ahmed shook his head. "The water is perfectly fine and filtered. It cannot make you ill." He wanted to gather her into a hug and stroke her back and brush the hair from her face. The instant he took a step closer, cool cloth raised again, she gave him a fierce glare. He tossed the cloth into the sink and held up his hands. "This is not just water. You are not well. I cannot have that." Her chin dropped, and she put a hand on her stomach. "It'll pass. It's just... well, mornings have never been the best time of day for me." He studied her. "Melanie, you've lost weight. I can see that. Your skin is as white as this sink, and there are shadows under your eyes." She straightened and brushed at her face. "That's called a lack of makeup, and I'll be fine. A little bicarbonate and ginger ale is all I need. Do you have any ginger ale around here?" "I will see some is obtained at once." Melanie licked her lips, and her stare darted away from his. Ahmed instantly sensed something was not right. "What is it, Melanie? You avoid me, and we need to talk." She shook her head. "Nothing to say. You're getting married. I'm here to work." He stepped closer. "If things go as I wish, there will be no wedding." She looked up at him, and her green eyes darkened. "You plan to dump Nasiji? What kind of—" He put his fingers on her lips. They were as soft as he remembered. "Nasiji wishes this farce to end as much as I do. This is our father's plan, not ours." Pulling his hand away, she stepped back again. "So why not tell them that?" He shook his head. "I could do so. Father will no doubt want to banish me. But Nasiji, it is not so easy for her. Her father has another husband already waiting. He will see her married no matter what. So I must find another way for her. I've been friends with her far too long to leave her in this mess her father wishes to make of her life." The sharpness eased from Melanie's eyes. She crossed her arms. A little color had returned to her face. "You're helping her out? That's an excuse I haven't heard before." Ahmed shrugged. "It is the truth. And now, will you make a bargain with me? If you do not feel better, will you see the palace doctor? I do not like the idea of you being ill." She shook her head. "I told you, I'm fine, and I can look after myself." She started to turn away, but he caught her arm. "Things are not done between us. I asked for you specifically so I could see you again." She pulled away. "Talk to me when you're not engaged to another woman, Ahmed. Maybe this wedding isn't for real, but have you even thought about what happens to me if that's the case?" He dropped his hand and shook his head. "What do you mean?" Stepping closer, she fixed a hard stare on him. "I mean that brides tend to get superstitious when it comes to their wedding day. I mean that a catering company that's hired for a high-profile event that blows up gets the stink of disaster on it. You get out of this. That's great for you. But my company and Madame Celeste's, we're both going to face a huge lack of business because no one wants to hire anyone involved with a huge wedding that crashed. So, thanks for nothing." She turned and walked out. Ahmed stared after her. Is that what he had done? Set her up to fail because this wedding would also fail? Chapter 9. Melanie's stomach settled down, but now her emotions were churning. Her whole reason for taking this job had been the hope that this would put her company on the map to handling huge events. She'd be up there with the Wolfgang Pucks of the world. Now that would never happen. Not if Ahmed planned to sabotage his own wedding. But why was part of her giddy with the idea that Ahmed wasn't marrying another woman? With a groan, she rested her head in her hands. She'd spent yesterday coming up with a list of hard-to-get ingredients she must have. She'd special-ordered new cookware and custom china, and she had a dozen more ideas for how to delay this wedding. Maybe Ahmed wouldn't mind if he found out she was doing that. By what Ahmed had said, Nasiji wouldn't mind either. But was that true? Stumbling to the bathroom, she brushed her teeth, her stomach churning. At least whatever had upset her stomach seemed to be settling down. But she felt bloated today, her legs puffy and her face even more so, and what was up with that? She stared at her pale reflection. Where was her energy? She'd been feeling run down of late, but this was worse than usual. Even coffee tasted bad these days. Maybe it was the heat and the added stress of putting her career on the line. A shower helped to put her back together. She dressed and went down to the kitchen. She couldn't look at eggs and settled for ginger ale. Ahmed had gotten her 3 cases of the stuff. And dry toast. She glanced at the menu she'd been working on and her stomach flipped. Damn it, what was wrong with her? Food usually got her excited. She wanted mouth-watering lamb and to-die-for vegetable dishes, and instead she was thinking about things like bland pudding and the bliss of mashed potatoes. She straightened. Maybe that was the clue. Comfort food. Mashed potatoes and feta cheese. Hummus and pine nuts baked in a brioche. It seemed like they could all use some of that, and she could leave the more exotic foods to her staff. She'd work out things that appealed to her, and if this wedding wasn't going to happen, then she had nothing to worry about. But what was that going to do to her company's reputation? She let out a sigh and glanced around the amazing kitchen she was working in. Well, at least she'd have a few days of being in the spotlight. And then it was back to grinding out a reputation somehow in the States. Heading over to the stove, she started working on a mint ginger sauce, something that smelled wonderful to her for a change and would complement any meat. Her staff would be coming down soon, and she always liked to be up before dawn and in the kitchen first. She heard the swinging door open and close and turned, expecting to see Sid, who was usually the first one down. Instead, Ahmed stood in the doorway in black sweats and sleeveless t-shirt, a white towel around his neck and a sheen on his skin as if he'd been working out. She knew she was supposed to be professional, but she couldn't help eyeing him. The t-shirt hugged his athletic frame, giving her reminders of the muscles underneath the clothes. Her mouth dried, and her pulse kicked up. A warmth lit his dark eyes, and she flashed on an image of the two of them going at it right on the stainless steel island counter. No doing that. Or him. She gave him a nod and went for formal. "Sheikh Ahmed?" "Melanie?" He gave her a boyish grin that had her heart flipping over. Damn it, the man was dangerous. The way he said her name left the words soft, floated along with his faint accent. She wanted to ask him to say it again, but she was not doing that either. "What are you cooking today?" he asked. "It smells great." "Just a sauce." "May I taste?" He came closer. She caught a whiff of his scent, something musky and unique to him, reminding her of the dry desert outside. Her mouth dried again, but she dipped a spoon into the sauce and held it up for him. With a smile, he tasted, his tongue darting out to lick the last drops. She remembered how that mouth had felt on her. Her stomach dropped. She put the spoon down before she dropped it. Glancing over her shoulder, he asked, "Will you make robeyan nashif, shrimp fried with spices? That is a favorite of mine." "You like shrimp? I haven't been cooking much lately with that. It's hard to get high-quality prawns these days." Ahmed waved a hand around. "Just ask. Anything you want can be flown in. But how about breakfast for now? Something simple, perhaps? Honey and bread?" She smiled and shook her head. "Did you come here to raid the kitchen?" He shrugged. "What need have I to cook for myself? The palace has 4 chefs, and I eat out whenever I want. But now I want you to make me something. What about something very American? Flapjacks?" She gave a laugh. "How about I teach you to make them? Pancakes were the first thing I learned to make, but I have a recipe for Swedish pancakes that are so thin you can see through them and so light they're like a taste of heaven." He tossed the towel onto one of the stainless steel islands and rubbed his hands together. "Sounds wonderful. Where are the instructions?" She tapped her temple. "First lesson. A chef learns to memorize recipes." She glanced at the sweat drying on his skin, on his muscular forearms and chest. She licked her lips and turned to get him an apron. She needed some of that temptation covered up. "Wash up and put this on." Surprisingly, Ahmed followed her instructions. After he'd washed, he picked up the apron and stared at it. Taking it from him, she draped the top loops over his head and let it drop down. Walking behind him, she grabbed the ties and tied it loosely behind him. She smiled as she breathed in his spicy scent. Memories of his fingers sliding over her skin, of him buried inside her, flashed into her, washing heat through her. Shaking her head to clear her wayward thoughts, she stepped back to the counter. She had Ahmed pull out flour, eggs, and the spices she wanted, including fresh ground vanilla bean and cardamom. She pulled down mixing bowls and set the heat under a flat pan on the stove. She was surprised how well they worked together, how companionable this was, how nice. She warned herself not to trust the feeling. She was used to doing things on her own, had been for a long time. That was what happened when you didn't have parents or siblings close by. That was what happened when you went to culinary school and learned how competitive the world could be. She'd been doing fine on her own. It didn't matter to her if Ahmed was or wasn't marrying someone else. She would be on her own again. But this was still a moment of joy. Ahmed glanced at the batter he'd made and frowned. "How do you know when it's ready?" "Taste and texture." She took the spoon from him and stirred. "We don't want any bubbles, but you want a smooth consistency. Thin, but not too thin." She glanced at him. "Kind of like traditional, but not too traditional." He smiled, his dark eyes lightening. "This isn't so hard." "Yeah, well, let's see if you burn the first pancake or not." He stood close, his shoulder brushing hers, as she showed him how to pour the batter. Her heart was thudding again, and her upper lip dampened with sweat. Not from the stove. She liked the small frown that pulled his eyebrows flat and tight. She liked the way he lifted his head as if that would let him see better. She liked that he was interested. With a shock, she realized she liked Ahmed a lot more than she should. The image of them doing this back in New York at her apartment on a Sunday morning flashed into her head. But that wasn't ever going to happen. He had his world, she had hers, which meant a business to run. And well, she didn't know what he did. Maybe he was just a playboy. And maybe if he didn't get married, they'd see each other once in a while. But domestic bliss, well, just not happening. "Is that all there is to it?" he asked, staring at the pan as the pancakes started to brown. "It's no mystery. It's about paying attention, and the hard part is simply watching and waiting for the pancakes to be perfect. No, don't turn them too early. You want one turn each." She showed him how to turn the pancakes, putting her hand over his. Reaching up, she grabbed a plate. "And you eat not just with your mouth. You want the eyes and the nose involved." Working fast, she pulled out mint and raspberries, lemon and sugar and cinnamon. She whipped cream with a whisk, added the sugar, a squeeze of lemon and cinnamon, and showed him how to plate. "The mint's a garnish, a touch of scent and green. The raspberries are better than any syrup. You just crush them lightly. And I wish we had some lingonberries, but these will do." Stepping back, she admired the plate. 4 golden, crisp Swedish pancakes, a dollop of whipped cream, a drizzle of the crushed raspberries, with a couple added next to the mint. It looked appealing even to her. Inspiration struck, and she added a light dash of fresh ground ginger, an exotic touch, over the whipped cream. They headed for one of the stainless steel islands, not the one that held his sweaty towel, and she offered him a fork. She watched as he took his first bite. His dark eyes lit up. "Good?" she asked. He nodded and took another bite. "Better than good. And now I can cook for myself." He smiled and looked ridiculously satisfied with himself. She ate a few bites as well. She really didn't have much appetite, but the pancakes had come out beautifully, and the touch of ginger on the whipped cream added a bite that complemented the creaminess. They finished eating, and she took the plates to the dishwasher. Ahmed pulled off his apron and came over to her. "You have taught me something. Now I need to teach you in return. What is something you've wanted to learn but have never taken the time for?" She glanced around the kitchen. She had prep work and menus to work on, but wasn't this another way to delay the wedding? She started to wonder if Ahmed had maybe hired the guy who had approached her. After all, a guy who wanted to blow up his own wedding wouldn't be shy about delaying it as well to get more time to make things go wrong. But Ahmed took her hand and urged, "Come on, there must be something." "Self-defense," she said, blurting out the word. "I've always wanted to learn, but I've never taken a class." Ahmed rubbed his closely cropped beard with his free hand. He didn't let go of her fingers with the other. "Okay, I can show you a few things." He pulled her with him. She dragged her feet a little, but he only glanced back, grabbed his towel, and said, "Come on. We need the gym and mats in case you manage to flatten me." She pulled a face. "As if that's going to happen. But I'm not dressed for it." He shook his head. "You'll stop to put on sweats if any guy in New York comes up to attack you. Oh, sorry, mister, I must take off my high heels and get ready for you."
"I don't need the mockery."
He grinned. "No, you need to learn just a few moves." Dragging her along, he strode down corridors and back halls, past security guards and maids who smiled and seemed to regard this as nothing unusual. She was starting to wonder if anything Ahmed did startled anyone. Was everyone used to him misbehaving? If that was true, he was going to have a really hard time making his wedding come off the rails, since no one would bat an eye at him doing anything outrageous. Pulling her into the gym, he let go of her hand and headed to an area of dark blue mats that covered part of the hardwood floor. The floors gleamed with polish. She glanced around, seeing a punching bag, a full-up boxing ring, weights and state-of-the-art stationary bikes, and even a pool in the distance. Windows showed a view into a garden on one side, the pool was on the other, and skylights let in natural light. Air conditioning brushed a cool breeze over her face. Angie had been using the gym, but Melanie had never imagined it was so huge. Ahmed threw down his towel and faced her, waving her closer. "Come over. Punch me." He squared his shoulders and kept his hands by his side. Walking over to him and stepping onto the mats, she asked, "Aren't you supposed to be fake attacking me?" He rolled his eyes. "I need to know if you can punch first." She lifted a hand, bunched her fist, and threw a punch at his chest. He grabbed her hand. "You punch like a girl, and you telegraph every move. Put your thumb over your fingers and punch with the arm, not your fist. Faster this time. Try it again." She threw another punch. Again, he blocked it. Stepping around her, he grabbed her hand and her arm. One hand rested on her hip while he gripped her hand. "Tighter fist." He pulled her arm back. "Throw straight out as hard as you can. Fake with one hand and hit with the other." Melanie closed her eyes, wishing that they were doing something else. Even though his touch on her was harmless, she was having difficulty concentrating. She shivered as his fingers stroked down her arm. He stepped away from her, moving in front of her again. She faked with the right and threw another punch with her left hand. Her fist smacked into his hard chest. "Good. Now, if you want to do some harm, aim for the throat." Stepping behind her, he pulled her left hand back. She swallowed the growing lump in her throat and reminded herself to focus on what he was saying and not where his hands were roaming. "This gives you the chance to throw another punch as powerful as the first. So, it's fake, then hit and hit. Practice once. Put your weight into it, but keep your feet anchored." He put his hands on her hips. His warm breath on the back of her neck was doing things to her insides. She kept thinking about the last time they'd had sex, how he'd come into her from behind, how he'd held her like this, how his body had felt pressed up against hers afterward. Ahmed seemed oblivious. "Come on, punch." Swallowing hard, she did as he asked, trying to concentrate on throwing one punch after another. "Good. Can you feel the power in those punches?" he asked. She turned slightly to tell him she could. Her gaze met his, and she froze. So did he. He was still gripping her hips, but his eyes darkened now. The smile went out of his stare, and hunger came into it. Reaching up, he traced one finger down her cheek and then pushed her hair back behind her ear. She sucked in a breath, heart hammering. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He leaned closer and put his mouth on hers. She leaned into him, pressing her body against his. She had no idea she'd wanted this, longed for it. She could only think how he had tasted of ginger and cinnamon and cardamom and something that was uniquely him. His lips parted, and she opened her mouth to him. He caught the back of her neck and deepened the kiss. She gave a low groan. She had no idea how long they kissed before he pulled back. His breath came in short gasps. So did hers. Resting his forehead against hers, Ahmed closed his eyes. "It was a mistake bringing you here," he confessed. "I can't seem to get you out of my thoughts." Melanie turned and put her hands on his chest, resting them flat against him. Unable to look at his face, she whispered, "I haven't stopped thinking about you either. But you are still engaged to someone else. I don't care if you say that's fake. We can't do this. Not right now." "It's my father's plan, not mine." Melanie stepped back. "You sure about that? Nasiji's beautiful and charming. Why not marry her?" "The only woman I am attracted to is you, Melanie. From the moment I first laid eyes on you, everyone else has paled in comparison." He smiled and touched her cheek again. "That was why I had to see you again. I will always have to see you again." "Really? Me and how many other women?" Ahmed stepped back and rubbed the back of his neck. "Is that what you think of me? My father has no respect for me. Thinks I'm a boy, not a man. He thinks marriage will make me grow up." Melanie hugged herself. Her stomach was queasy again. "And is he right?" Turning away, Ahmed took 3 steps to the door and stopped. He turned back to her. "Does it matter what he thinks? I will have his respect someday. I will have yours." Melanie shook her head. "Really? You're just going to order it and that will make it so? Ahmed, it doesn't work like that. Respect is earned, and it's my company you hired. You didn't buy me. Now excuse me, I have work to do. It seems like maybe you do have a few things yet to learn besides cooking." Chapter 10. Ahmed got Nasiji's text message after he had showered and dressed in jeans and a light linen shirt. His father would not approve of the jeans, but Ahmed intended to tell his father that Nasiji liked Western clothing. That would irritate the old man. Heading down into the garden, he met Nasiji beside the fountain. They would be able to see anyone coming from here, and the splash of the water would cover up anything Nasiji had to say. Stopping in front of her, he crossed his arms. "What is it?" Nasiji pulled back her veil, lifted her skirts, slipped out of her sandals, and slid her bare feet into the fountain. "It's going to be hot today." "It already is. What did you want to see me about?" "About?" She glanced up at him, her green eyes pale and sparking. "How can you ask that? The wedding comes at us fast, and your plans seem to be going nowhere." "Nonsense. They're working very well. You must complain more. Tell that wedding planner—" "Her name is Madame Zoleste." "Yes, well, tell her you have changed your mind about the colors. Bright colors, or make it all white, with doves and orchids or something else extravagant. My father hates wasting money, so demand real gold in the decorations and ridiculous wedding gifts to hand out. And make certain this wedding planner, this Madame Zoleste, sends immediate bills to my father. And we must do more to irritate yours." Nasiji splashed her feet. "This is only going to get me married to my father's horrible cousin." "No, I've been thinking about that. I have arranged for a doctor's report to be leaked to your father. It seems this aged cousin is now, as the phrase goes, shooting blanks. If your father wants grandchildren, he will not look to that old man to be a husband to you." Turning, Nasiji swung her feet out of the fountain pond and stood. "That, at least, is a good idea. But what about the rest? My father is still expanding the guest list for our wedding. He's going to see us married, Ahmed." He took her hand and patted it. "Calm yourself. The plan is working. I hear from my brothers how my father is already grumbling under his breath, which means he is rethinking this plan of his. He will soon be looking at this as a bad idea and coming up with a scheme to undo it."
All we need is to spark one good argument between your father and mine over this wedding, and they will both call it off and think they have done good in ending an alliance that could only disgrace both families." She frowned and pulled her hand away. "Really? Then you had better not keep flirting with that caterer. Oh, don't open your mouth to deny it and give me those big innocent eyes. I hear the maids gossip, and they see more than you think. Your father is going to think you need a wife to settle you more than ever if you keep flirting with that American." Ahmed stiffened. "That is none of your business." "This is my business, for it is my life. Put your mind to ending the wedding, not to getting into the pants of that American. You'll have time to do her in the kitchen if you wish after this wedding is called off." Throat tight and the pulse pounding in his jaw, Ahmed leaned forward. "You will do well not to mention Melanie again to me, or I will simply walk away from this and leave you to your father's plans." He turned and strode away, the pulse still pounding hard. He did not know why Nasiji's words should anger him so much, but Melanie was nothing to do with Nasiji. The need to see Melanie swept into him. He had to know she was well. He headed to the kitchens. Was she not always there? As usual, he found her working with batters and mixers and what looked like cakes. Oddly, however, her staff was not all so busy with her. He paused in the doorway, one hand holding open the door, to watch her. She stood with her back to him, bent over, her black slacks showing off the curve of her hips and her round ass. Her dark hair for once was pinned back in a clip. She seemed to sense him, for she straightened and looked up at him, her green eyes brightening for an instant and then a frown pulling her dark eyebrows flat. "Where is everybody?" he asked and strolled into the kitchen. "I gave them the afternoon off." She gave a shrug. Flour dusted her pants and her fingers. "Told them to go sightseeing. I'm still working on menus and trying to figure out what's a traditional but not too traditional wedding cake." Her voice had gone throaty and rough. He ought to turn right around, and yet he couldn't tear himself away. The kiss they had shared earlier lingered between them. He stepped closer to her. "And why did you not go with them?" I'm still working on the menu. You might think this wedding can be postponed or ended, but if it isn't, I need to be ready." "Postponed?" he asked, puzzled she should use that word. She turned away and picked up what looked like a chocolate-covered slice of candied orange. She offered it to him. "What do you think? Traditional but not too much? The orange is candied with spices and honey." He put a hand on hers and took a bite of the delicacy. It was delicious. A drop of honey escaped from the corner of his mouth, and she put up a thumb to wipe it away. Desire burst in him, hot and as consuming as a desert storm. Turning, he gestured to the small cakes that were cooling. "Is that for the wedding? You are putting a great deal of effort into this." "I'm being well paid, aren't I? Both to get it done and put it off." He glanced at her and frowned, uncertain what she was talking about. But she cut off a slice of one of the cakes and held it up between her thumb and forefingers. Honey spice angel food? Devil's food just seemed too obvious a choice. "Whatever it is, I will always want a taste if you offer." He took her wrist and pulled her fingers to his lips. Pressing the tip of his tongue to the edge of her thumb, he licked and guided her hand to his lips, leaving her no choice but to allow him to take her finger and the cake into his mouth. He bit into the cake's sweetness and then sucked her finger, watching her eyes dilate. Letting go of her hand, he saw her pull away. He smiled. "It is just the way I like it." He saw her throat work, but she did not step away from him. His mouth went dry. She tilted her head to one side. "This is impossible, you know." Ahmed put his hands on her waist. "What I know is that we fit together." "We had a fling, that's all. A couple of days." "And why can we not have more?" Melanie reached up and brushed her fingers over his lips. "Because you're a prince, and this Cinderella works for a living and has a company to run." Growling, he pulled her against him. "You can feel my desire for you." He rocked his hips against her. She gave a low moan, and her eyes slid half-closed. Ahmed lifted one hand and buried his fingers in her hair. I want you so much."
Leaning close, he kissed the corner of her mouth and then her neck, just where her collar hung open. With a shove, she pushed him away. "Ahmed, you're getting married, and we're not going to screw around in the kitchen."
Reluctantly, he let go of her. "And after this wedding is no more?"
"After, I'll be heading to New York, and I'll have to work damn hard to clean up my company's reputation. It's only your money I want." Melanie snapped the words out at him, aiming them like knives. "I'll make sure you have the time to blow it up, but then I'm gone." He shook his head.
"What are you talking about? The time to blow it up?"
She parted her lips as if to say something, turned pale, and suddenly slapped a hand over her mouth. Turning, she darted to the bathroom. He heard sounds of retching. Following her, he found her leaning over the sink. The room smelled of vomit, and Melanie was shaking.
"That does it. You are seeing the palace doctor, now."
She started to shake her head, but he simply swept her up in his arms. "Ahmed."
"No, I am not hearing any more protests."
"I was going to ask what happens if I throw up all over you."
He glanced at her. "Then you throw up. Try at least to aim for one of the potted plants."
Thankfully, she did not throw up, and Ahmed carried her into the office of the palace physician. Dr. Hashim glanced up from his computer and came immediately to the couch where Ahmed had settled Melanie. Ahmed explained how Melanie had been throwing up. Hashim had been the palace doctor for as long as Ahmed could remember. Portly now, his head balding, he looked his age, but his black eyes were as sharp as ever, and he told Ahmed to wait outside. Ahmed paced the corridor. At last, Hashim opened the door and gestured for Ahmed to enter again. Melanie was buttoning up her shirt and still looking pale. Glancing from Melanie to Hashim, Ahmed asked,
"What is it? Flu? Food poisoning?" "Oh, something far more serious," Dr. Hashim said. He rubbed a hand over his balding head. "As I have told her, she should start vitamins. It is early yet, but I see no reason she should not have a healthy baby."
Ahmed's legs threatened to buckle. He put a hand out and caught himself on the wall. He glanced at Melanie. She was not looking at him, but was staring at the floor. Ahmed looked at Hashim again.
"Could you give us a minute?"
Dr. Hashim nodded and left. Ahmed walked over to stand in front of Melanie.
"I meant to tell you, the condom, that last time, it broke."
She glanced up at him, her mouth set. "Great. Now you tell me." He swallowed hard. A lump seemed stuck in his throat.
Will you fly home and
His words fled. Melanie stared up at him. Her eyes seemed to harden into emeralds that flashed fire. "And what? Take care of it? Get an abortion? Get rid of this complication? Newsflash, it's my body, my baby, and—" She cut off her words and sucked in a breath. "And I'll decide." He stiffened.
"It is my child as well, and I will not see any baby of mine brought into this world without a name."
She stood. "He or she will have a name. And if you think I'm marrying you just because I'm pregnant, think again. It isn't planned, but I'm more than able to figure out my own life. Thank you very much, Mr. Sheikh." She pushed past him and walked out the door. Ahmed sat down. A child. A flare of excitement kindled in him. He could see Melanie with his baby in her arms. He wanted that. This changed everything between them. But how did he make her see this as well? Chapter 11. Melanie headed for her room, locked the door behind her, and leaned against it, eyes closed. No wonder she'd been exhausted and throwing up. Pregnant. The word echoed in her head. She wanted to burst into tears. She put her hands on her stomach. She also wanted to give a shout. A baby wasn't in her plans. Not now, anyway. And not like this. But she'd always wanted a family. A big one. That had been a someday idea for after she'd established herself and her company. But now... Images of her as a single mom, working for someone else's restaurant or catering company because she couldn't put in the hours necessary to run her own business, flashed into her mind. And then she thought of Ahmed, pushing a toddler on a swing as the child laughed. Eyes opening, she drew a shallow breath, wishing that image could come true. But she was too old for fantasies like that. She wasn't Cinderella, Ahmed didn't have a glass slipper, and happy ever after didn't happen. Not in her world. She frowned and rubbed her forehead. One thing she knew in her bones, she was not getting an abortion. She also had some time, and $100,000 coming to her if she managed to get the delays to the wedding that Ahmed wanted. That would do a lot to help her deal with a baby. She might be able to make this work if she got Ahmed his wedding delay. She rubbed her tight forehead again. She was not going to think about Ahmed not only getting out of his wedding with Nasiji, but also asking her to marry him. No way. He'd want her to live in this palace and give up her life and her work. She'd seen how Nasiji had to wear robes and a veil and how even the women in the city covered their heads. That wasn't for her. She had a life back in New York, not here. And now she had a baby to plan for. Pushing off the door, she pulled out her phone. She ordered the vitamins the doctor had recommended, did a little research on how to deal with morning sickness and low energy, and then she did what she hadn't done in far too many weeks. She called her mother. She didn't have to say more than hello before her mother said, "What's the matter, baby?" "It's just been a tough job, and I guess, well, I'm just tired and ready to come home." Her mother gave a low chuckle. "Man trouble?" Melanie winced. "Okay, how on earth do you figure that stuff out so fast?" "Honey, it's a mother's sixth sense. You know you can talk to me about anything. Honey, I worked too much when you were growing up. I missed out on so much. Don't make me miss out on more. What's going on?" The soft tone of her mom's voice was too much, and Melanie began to cry. "Melanie, what's wrong? Talk to me." "Oh, Mom, I fell for a guy I shouldn't have, and let's just say I don't think he's Mr. Dependable, and I'm pregnant." She let out the last word on a wail. "Melanie, honey, it's not the end of the world. Plenty of women raise children on their own. I did, and I know it wasn't fun at times, and it doesn't mean you won't meet someone else later. But I don't want anyone else. I'm an idiot to say that." Her mother laughed. Damn it. "Yeah, the wrong guys have a lot of charm. But honey, I'm here for you. My mom, bless her, wasn't alive for me, but I'm here. You're not going to be on your own. It's not going to be hard work and giving up everything. And darling, as much as I wanted some things, I wouldn't exchange you for any other life. You were a blessing. So don't you think that the way you were raised is how it has to be. I never had your skills in the kitchen, and you will never have to work the hours I did." Melanie wiped at her nose. "I know I'm whining, but I can't help myself." "Melanie Marie Martin, now you listen to me and you listen to me now. You're going to be an emotional mess. That's just the hormones. And I've got to tell you, sometimes it's those unexpected detours that are often the best things to happen to us. You may or may not hang on to this guy, so just enjoy every moment you do have and take it easy on yourself. On him, too. Now, go wash your face. Put your shoulders back and do what you've done since you were 8 and your daddy walked out on us. Go bake something." Managing a low chuckle, Melanie wiped at her eyes. "You're right, Mom. On everything. I'll call you as soon as I'm back in New York." She ended the call and then headed to the one thing that had always saved her sanity, the kitchen and cooking. Of course, she should have known better. Ahmed was waiting for her there. She almost turned around and headed back to the refuge of her room. But they needed to talk. They could deal with this like 2 adults. Or that's what she hoped. "What are you thinking about?" Ahmed asked. She headed to her knives, which were spread out in the carrying case she had brought with her. "Work," she said. He came over to her and took her hand. "You should be thinking about more important things. Names, for example." She pulled her hand from his grip and faced him. "My work is important, Ahmed. I've busted my butt to get Catering established. I had to declare bankruptcy once before this. I tried a restaurant and it didn't work out, so I found another way. The money you're paying me, that's going to help, but I am not giving up my business. I love it too much." Ahmed stuffed his hands into the front pockets of his jeans. "You and the baby have nothing to worry about. I will support you and the child completely. You may work only as much as you wish." Melanie crossed her arms. "Oh, great. Thanks. Just what I want, to be a kept woman. You're not hearing me. My work is important. My business matters to me. I'm not in this to make it a hobby." He rubbed his beard and shook his head. "So you intend to push me out of your life? To leave this child without a father? Or what, you think you can find an American man to be the father to my child?" She bit down on her lower lip. "No, I know there's the child to consider. I don't want him or her not to have a dad around." She leaned a hand on the counter. The urge to burst into tears was hovering close, stinging her eyes. I think I need time to absorb this." He covered her hands with his. "Let me handle everything for you." He sounded more serious than she'd ever heard him sound before. She almost couldn't believe his reaction. She didn't know what she'd expected from him, but she hadn't expected him to suddenly want to be a dad. She glanced at him, took in the dark eyes, the slight curve to his mouth. "You know, there are a lot of things I wanted to do before having a child," she said, not really talking to him, though if he happened to be listening, that was fine too. His smile widened. "You talk like you just found out you were disabled." She nodded. "There are a lot of things you can't do once you have a child, and the things you can do with one suddenly become more complicated as you juggle the responsibility of being a parent with whatever you're doing. You know, I had a plan. Or I thought I had a plan." "I know," Ahmed said, running a hand through her hair, sympathy in his voice. "I did as well. And now it is dust. I am going to lose everything with this gamble. My father's respect. But I will at least have my own self-respect. And you. I do not want to lose you. And this baby does not have to be the end of all your dreams and ambitions. Think of us in New York. Me with that gallery I wish to open, and my real estate investments. You cater not for weddings, but for business events, such as the one where we met, and for the openings at my galleries." She smiled. "You just jumped from one gallery to several. But that's not a bad idea. Specialize in business events, not weddings. It wouldn't matter then what happens with you and Nasiji." He frowned. "I may have to work some magic yet." He took her hand between both of his. "I don't know what will happen next. Khalid will someday assume my father's position as Sultan, and Zaid is being groomed to take over many of the family business interests. And I've spent too much of my life partying and getting in trouble. I've done a lot of stupid shit, but I've always wanted to start my own business." She let out a breath. "I guess you'll have plenty of opportunity with our baby to prove them wrong, that you are responsible." "Our baby," he grinned. "It sounds better every time." "But Ahmed, what about Nasiji? Is she going to get stuck getting married to any old body just because you won't marry her?" He lifted her hand and kissed her palm. "I wish I could say that this is one thing that will be easy to throw money at to make everything better, but it isn't. Right now I'm asking you to trust me. Can you do that?" Melanie stared at him, unsure how to respond. Could she trust him? But he was the father of her child. How could she not at least give him a chance? She nodded and said, "Okay. What's the plan?" Chapter 12. Ahmed took Melanie with him to confront his father. This was not going to be easy, but it must be done. The child changed everything. This was a huge risk. He knew he was facing the loss of everything. If this went wrong, he would lose Melanie and the baby. He would have to face prison if his father lost his temper. But it was a chance. He had to take it. They came across Nasiji near the front door, in a dress that must have come from Paris. With her olive skin, green eyes, and long black hair, she was startling. She also looked startled. Her eyes widened, and she glanced from Ahmed to Melanie. Ahmed glanced at the luggage near her feet. "Going somewhere?" Nasiji's cheeks darkened, and Ahmed smiled. "You've been preparing your escape from here, haven't you? Getting your own plans in place." She lifted her chin. "What? I was supposed to trust you would get us out of this marriage?" She glanced at Melanie. "You should be warned. Ahmed is best at looking after himself." Ahmed's face warmed, but Melanie stepped up to Nasiji. "In New York, a girl learns a few things, like how to spot a good guy. You should have trusted Ahmed." Nasiji's face darkened even more. The front door opened, and a man stepped in. Ahmed stiffened. "Who are you?" The man gave a low bow. He dressed in traditional robes and curiously light amber eyes. Ahmed heard Melanie suck in a breath and mutter, "You!" The man stepped closer to Nasiji. "Are you ready?" Nasiji gave a short nod. "Yes, Jamul." Ahmed stepped forward. "Just who are you, and why are you making off with Nasiji?" Nasiji faced him. "You have no more business in my affairs, and this is the son of my father's cousin." Ahmed frowned. "The old man you don't want to marry, but you do want to run off with his son." Jamul grinned. "It has taken me long enough to convince her it is a good idea, and now we must go." In a low voice, Melanie muttered, "Guess this means our deal is off?" Jamul glanced at her. "I think you are in Ahmed's care." Ahmed glanced from her to Jamul, but Melanie merely shrugged, and Jamul was too busy picking up Nasiji's luggage. He huffed out a breath. "I will see if I can keep my father's attention long enough for you to get to the airport." "I have a yacht waiting," Jamul said. Nasiji turned and started for the door, but she came back, stood on tiptoe, and kissed Ahmed's cheek. "I am sorry I could not wait for you to be my hero and save me from a marriage I did not want." Ahmed gave her a small smile and caught her hand. "Where is your burqa? Did you leave it?" She shook her head and gestured to the smallest of her luggage. Taking the bag from Jamul, Ahmed gave it to Melanie. "Here, take this with you, just in case, and then wait for me in your room." Her lips parted, and he knew she was about to ask questions or protest, so he kissed her quickly and said, "Please, Melanie." She let out a breath, but she took the case. "I've got a feeling whatever you're planning is not going to go well." He shrugged and then looked at Jamul. Taking Nasiji's hand, he put it in Jamul's free hand. "Beat her if she gives you trouble. And she will." Jamul grinned. "Oh no, I know how to treasure a pearl beyond price." The two headed out the front door. Ahmed glanced at Melanie and took her hand. "And now I must not only tell my father that I am marrying you since you carry my child, but that Nasiji has fled the country rather than marry me." Melanie wrinkled her nose. "We haven't settled anything yet, and I am not just marrying you because it's your child, but, well, good luck with your dad." She gave him a kiss on the cheek and headed for her room. Outside his father's office, the security guards gave Ahmed brief nods. His father's door stood open, and Ahmed stepped in. He saw no need to delay what was necessary, so he simply said, "Father, I am not marrying Nasiji. I am marrying the woman who carries my child." The Sultan looked up from his paperwork and sat back in his chair. "Are you drunk this early in the day?" Ahmed stepped in and shut the door behind him. "You told Khalid he had to choose his own wife. Why are you so determined to dictate who I'm to marry?" "Yes, I told your oldest brother to find his own bride, and you see the mess his American reporter made of that." "What I saw were not 2, but 4 people whose lives would have been ruined if you had not agreed to their union." Ahmed leaned his palms on his father's desk.
I only wish to now follow in my brother's footsteps." His father let out a long breath. "I will not allow a repeat of that embarrassment. You will not bring dishonor to our family. You will marry Nasiji Yafasa." "I don't love her. I am in love with my American." "You're what?" The Sultan stood. He was a towering man, and Ahmed suddenly felt as he had as a child. His father strode out from behind the desk. "I will not allow this." "You mistake me, father. I am not asking for your blessing. I am doing you the courtesy of telling you my plans." His heart was beating in heavy thuds. He was aware of Nasiji and how she needed time to get to Jammu's yacht. If he did not delay his father, the Sultan was all too able to send guards down to the docks and might well have Nasiji brought back here by force. Jamul, of course, would be jailed and might even face a death sentence for treason. Ahmed could not allow that. He began a long explanation of the circumstances of how he had met Melanie and fallen in love with her. As he spoke, he realized all of it was true. He wanted to marry her not just because she carried his child. He had fallen in love with her from the very first. With her bright eyes and her sweetness and her love of food and life, she was what he needed. If any woman could give him the life he needed, it was her. He had spoken more truly than he had known. They fit together. His father's face darkened. The man's jaw tightened, and he started to shake his head. He sliced a hand through the air suddenly and shouted, "Guards!" The security men stepped into the room. Ahmed stiffened. "Father, I am not 10 and to be sent to my room. You wanted me to grow up. Well, I have. I know what I want." His father stepped closer. "You know nothing. You have been warned time and time again to behave in a manner appropriate to your position, but you have chosen to ignore my pleas to the point of causing considerable embarrassment to the family. You will stop this foolishness over another woman and marry Nasiji. She is from a worthy family and will give you strong sons. Do you understand me?" Ahmed swallowed hard. "What I understand is that I will never have your respect, will I? That is all I have wanted. But no, you must treat me as a child. You tell me to grow up, but what you really mean is that you want me to do as you wish. Well, I won't." The Sultan gave a low growl, then turned to the security guards. "See that the American catering staff is put on the next flight back to New York. Find Nasiji and bring her to me now." He faced Ahmed again. "If you do not do as I tell you, you will never see anything outside these palace walls again. You will never leave here. You will never have a life. I vow this. And Nasiji will be whipped and sent back to her father in disgrace." Ahmed allowed his shoulders to slump. It was time for Plan B, since the first plan had gone so poorly. "Very well, father. I will fetch Nasiji and marry her. But we will do so now, in the garden, with my brothers there to witness, and then I am leaving the country for a good long time, for I do not wish to see a father who would think so little of his son's happiness." The Sultan shook his head. "I do think of it, Ahmed. That is the trouble. And I think if you do not marry, you will waste your life in nothing but empty pleasure. Go, fetch your bride. If I can only have you married at once, then it will be at once." The Sultan turned to the guards. "You will still see those American caterers leave the country." Palms sweaty, Ahmed hurried from the room. He had to reach Melanie before security headed to her room. He prayed she would not be difficult with this, that she would not protest. He feared this might be the only future for them. He found Melanie standing by her open window. He stopped in the doorway, aware of her as he had not been before, how her skin seemed to glow, how her eyes warmed when she looked at him. She was the woman he truly wanted to marry, and not just because she was the mother of his child. Stepping into the room, he locked the door and strode to where Nasiji's case sat on the bed. "Melanie, this will not be the wedding you may wish, but I ask you,
No. I beg you. Will you put on Nasiji's burqa and be her and marry me in her place?" Melanie's eyes welled with tears.
"You want me to be in a fake wedding?"
"No." He took out the burqa and walked to her side. "I want this to be a very real wedding between us. Khalid's wife came to him in circumstances that were almost too much for my father. She is an American too, and now father is adamant there will never be a repeat of such a thing. I will not bother you with father's threats, but I also will not be without you, and I will not leave our child without a father. If this is what it takes to marry you, I will do what we must."
Melanie glanced down at the burqa. "What happens if I say no? Bad things? Will Nasiji be dragged back here to marry you?"
He could not lie to her. Not about this. "My father is Sultan. He rules this country. His will is law. But once we are married, you and I can leave his power. Will you help me? Will you marry me?"
She looked up from the burqa. The corner of her mouth lifted. "It's not the most romantic proposal, but I guess it's for a good cause. But don't think this means I'm becoming your property, and, well, what's happening to my staff?"
"They are being sent back to New York. I will have us on a flight there as soon as the wedding is done."
He stared at her, his chest tight. She took the burqa from him. He had to help her into it and help her with the veil. All too soon she was covered, so that only her green eyes, so much more vibrant and vivid than Nasiji's, shone out from behind the back veils. He gave her a nod. It was less than honorable that he must start his life with her with this deception, but he was determined that no matter what happened, he was going to keep Melanie and their child with him. They were going to be the center of his world. He led her out of the room. Her hand was shaking. He squeezed her fingers and told her the words she must say, making her repeat them over and over so she would know the Arabic. Leaning close to her, he whispered, "Courage, Habibi." She squeezed his hand. "This had better not end up with both of us in a dungeon. I hate when fairy tales go that way." He gave a small laugh. "After we are married, a magic carpet will fly us away. I promise you that, Habibi." From under the veil, she looked at him. "And just what does that mean?" "It means my love." Chapter 13. Melanie sucked in a breath. My love. Habibi. Of course. He said it so casually. Her heart gave a jerk, and she had to steady herself with a breath. Did he mean that? Or was he saying what she wanted to hear? Those stupid tears that seemed to be hovering close these days threatened to spill. She tried to blink them away, and then decided Nasiji might well be crying at her own wedding. And what man ever wanted to deal with a crying woman? She gave a sniffle and felt Ahmed stiffen next to her. Great. The tears would help cover any mangling of the wedding vows she managed. Oh, what was she thinking, getting married like this? I'm thinking about giving the baby a father and a future. She swallowed hard. She was also thinking that it was more than wonderful to have Ahmed's arm to lean on right now. This whole thing had become a mess. The wedding was going to be a rush job. She wasn't going to get the 100,000 Jamul had promised her. At least she was helping Nasiji to get away with her guy, and this would let Ahmed get out of the country. She had a feeling the Sultan was more than able to pen up any of his family in the palace, or the palace dungeons if such a thing existed. She shivered. When she got back to New York, it was going to be a long, long time before she stepped out of the country again. And she'd figure out then what she was going to do about Ahmed. She could always file for a divorce. They stepped into the garden to find Ahmed's brothers waiting, along with the Sultan and a man who had to be a cleric of some kind. He at least had a kindly face. Everyone else looked as grim as if this was a funeral. Madame Zoleste must be having fits that all her plans were being thrown away. Ahmed and Nasiji had been meant to have a very modern wedding with touches of tradition,
held in a huge tent with gold and brightly glowing chandeliers. Melanie had seen the drawings of it. 600 guests, round dining tables, silk-covered chairs, white with gold everywhere, and henna adorning the bride and her attendants, while the groom wore a white suit and a white robe over that. She glanced up at Ahmed. He at least looked calm, and his eyes seemed clear. A band tightened around Melanie's chest. She wanted this ceremony to be for real, for Ahmed to be marrying her for love. Habibi, he had called her. But was that just because of the child? Or because she was getting him out of a tight spot? Would he marry her and then walk away? She put her shoulders back. It didn't matter if he did. He was here with her today. Her child would have a dad of some kind. And everything else she'd worry about tomorrow. Then she remembered she was supposed to be Nasiji, and marrying a guy she didn't love. She slumped a little. She knew there was supposed to be something called a zafar, a wedding march with drums and flaming swords and music to announce the marriage was about to begin. It seemed that Ahmed's brother Khalid had thought of this, for he had a boombox playing Arabian music, which stopped when she and Ahmed stood in front of the cleric. Nasiji should have been in a huge white gown with hands painted in intricate henna designs. Melanie kept her own shaking hands hidden within the black burqa. She must look like a crow. She also kept her head down and struggled to remember the Arabic Ahmed had taught her. Kabul, I accept. She was supposed to say it 3 times, and Ahmed had said he would nudge her when it was time to speak. Her mouth was dry at the thought of having to say anything. She was certain the Sultan or one of Ahmed's brothers was going to step forward, yank off her veil, and denounce her as an impostor. The cleric, or whoever he was, started to speak, but Ahmed interrupted. This is my wedding. I will ask it be in English as well, for it is my intent to live in New York after this with my bride. The cleric, an older man with a long graying beard, turned a worried look to the Sultan. Ahmed met his father's stare. The old man's eyes narrowed, but he gave a nod and a wave of his hand. Melanie wanted to pull off the burqa herself and run away into the night. Instead, she kept her head bowed, thought of the most miserable things she could, and let the tears flow. That at least had the Sultan shifting on his feet, and Ahmed's brothers swapped uneasy stares. But the ceremony went on. The ceremony was more about what the groom would give the bride. It was mostly a formality, but was meant to ensure the bride's security. The most important thing was to sign the contract. The cleric, or whoever he was, gave a speech, droning on about honoring women. Nasiji's father was supposed to be here. A table had been set out with the marriage contract. The Sultan signed first on behalf of Nasiji's father, then Ahmed signed. Melanie's hands were shaking when she was supposed to sign, and she scrawled her name. After she had, Ahmed's brother, Zaid, shot a worried look at her and then at Ahmed. The two swapped hard stares. Suddenly, it all seemed to be over. Ahmed took her hand and pulled her with him. Now there was supposed to be a party and guests and food and drink and music. Instead, Ahmed would be running away with her. She glanced back, saw Ahmed's brothers shaking their heads and Ahmed's father. For once, he looked like a worried old man. But he pushed back his shoulders, turned, and walked away. She glanced at Ahmed and muttered, "What now?" Chapter 14. Ahmed could not believe he had done it. He had married his sensual American. In Sharjah, as in much of the Arab world, the wedding wasn't just one rigid ceremony where the bride and groom stood for a few minutes and recited vows they were expected to memorize. The wedding usually started with the official announcement of the proposal, and then there were meant to be parties, similar to the bachelor parties he had been to in America, and the bachelorette parties he had heard of. The ceremony was almost an overlooked technicality, an excuse for food and wine and gifts. He'd just done away with all that. But did Melanie believe she was his wife in truth, and in his heart? He could not stop to find out. They needed to leave. He did not want his father to discover this trick. The Sultan would be insulted and furious, and Ahmed did not want Melanie to face such a thing. He pulled Melanie with him, up to her room.
"Pack quickly," he ordered.
She glanced at him. "What about you?"
He shook his head. "I have everything I need with me."
Stepping into her room, she pulled off the black veil. "And a passport? Money for tickets? Or did you plan on taking the family plane or stealing it?" He cursed. He had not thought of money. He was too accustomed to just taking whatever vehicle was close at hand.
"You are right. We cannot take the Sultan's jet. It would be too easy for my father to turn it around again. Wait here."
She started to protest, but he slipped out of the room and made his way to his room. He found his passport, slipped what jewelry he owned into his pocket, a ring, gold cufflinks, diamond and sapphire tie pins, and grabbed his wallet. He would leave all the credit cards, but he had the money from the investments he had made on his own. Trouble was, that money was in an American bank account, and he would not be able to access it until they got to New York. Walking out of his room, he ran straight into Khalid and Zaid. Khalid put a hand on Ahmed's shoulder.
"What have you done?" Ahmed brushed off his brother's hand. "You mean to father's plans?"
Zaid gave an exasperated sigh.
"Ahmed, you need to fix this mistake." "There is nothing to fix. Melanie is not a mistake," he ground out between clenched teeth.
Khalid groaned and asked,
"What happened to Nasiji?"
Glancing from Khalid to Zaid, Ahmed shook his head.
"She is gone. She did not want to marry. Neither did I." "So you marry an American you barely know."
Khalid let out a breath.
"This is worse than you kissing Congressman Ritchie's daughter and mistaking her for a woman well over the age of 18. It was a kiss. I didn't rape the girl, and that congressman's daughter knows more of the world than even I. But Nasiji and I agreed we would make each other unhappy. And Melanie, I will do everything I can to make her a good husband."
"And when father learns of this?" Zaid asked.
"We will be living in New York."
Ahmed glanced from one shocked face to the other.
"What if father has you kidnapped and brought home by force? Have you thought of that, Ahmed?" Zaid demanded.
Ahmed smiled.
"He will not do so if he ever wishes to see the grandchild Melanie gives him, and me."
Zaid sucked in a breath, and Khalid's eyes widened. Khalid started to smile.
"I must say you waste no time, brother. But please tell me you did not bed her when you were promised to another." "I met Melanie Martin in America. It was her catering company who was hired to work our business meeting."
Zaid gave a soft curse, and Ahmed laughed.
"Curse all you want, brother, but I think it was fate. I used protection, but the child could not wait for us. Marrying Nasiji would be another mistake if I was to do so. The right thing is to marry my love, Melanie. She is the woman who has my heart and my affection, and she is the mother of my child."
Khalid again put a hand on Ahmed's shoulder.
"You are growing up, little brother. The child may save you as well. But for now, you are wise to put some distance between you and father. Go. Zaid and I will do what we can to soften the news when it must come. But what of Nasiji? Is she really safe?"
With a shrug, Ahmed said,
"She is with a man who seems to love her, and I would guess he is at risk more than she is. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a bride who must be whisked from the country."
Zaid reached into his pocket and pulled out his car keys.
"Take my SUV. Head to our uncle's airport, but from there take a small plane to Cairo, and then I would suggest a very fast and public jet to New York."
Grabbing the keys, Ahmed nodded.
"Thank you. We will not forget this."
Khalid clapped his shoulder.
"Go now. Zaid and I will pull father into a discussion of politics. That will distract him, but he will be wanting you and your bride to appear at breakfast and for toasts to the future, and I suggest you make certain you are in New York by then."
Ahmed nodded.
"That is a plan I am most happy to fall in with. Oh, and once father learns I have married my American, please make sure you tell him that if he does anything to ever harm my child or the mother of my child, I will make very certain that I publicly come out in support of changing our government to a democratic one, and I will then put every effort behind his overthrow."
Zaid shook his head. "No threats, brother. You still have no idea how to handle our father. You let him bluster, you let him shout, and you send the very first ultrasound of his next grandchild, along with the names you have picked out. A baby will turn him soft, and he will mutter then that this American tricked you into marriage, but he will be resigned. But don't come home until the baby is here and ready to be presented to him.
Chapter 15. Melanie stood at the back of the aisle, waiting for the music to cue her approach. Her mother sat up front, wearing a tight red dress with golden embroidery, and Melanie had gone for a soft pink gown. She did not want to wear white, as Nasiji's wedding planning had once decided, and this was going to be a very American wedding. George was giving her away, Sid, Terry, and Angie were handling the catering, and Angie was crying right now and up front as maid of honor. Ahmed stood with his two brothers. Ahmed's father had refused to attend the wedding, but the sonograms of the baby, now a small bump and kicking today, had at least softened enough that he had set $200,000 into a college fund for the child. A harpist began to play, and the butterflies in Melanie's stomach dispersed. The time to think about her wedding was over. It was go time. She took the first step down the carpet set over the grass. Her mother's garden looked beautiful, lush with flowers and decorated with lanterns, with white chairs set out for the guests and ribbons fluttering. Her servers lined up to watch the ceremony, and tears stung Melanie's eyes. Khalid's wife, Casey, stood up at the front along with Angie, and Ahmed, well, this time she had no doubt that he wanted to marry her. The escape back to New York had been something of an anticlimax. She'd expected large men in dark suits to jump out and grab them. Instead, it had been a long drive, a long flight, an even longer flight after that, and then a quick trip through customs. Once in New York, Ahmed had explained he now must watch his money, for he was using his own. "I have only $500,000 to get us started. The rest, I fear, is invested in properties." She had stared at him. "How much is invested?" He'd shrugged. "If I liquidate, I will only raise $5 or $6 million. If we keep the buildings, the income over time will be much better. Some of them need renovation, and I want to show you the two I'm thinking of for galleries." She'd nodded and had swallowed hard. She wasn't just married to a prince, a sheikh. She was married to a very rich man. She hadn't expected that. She'd taken him back to her apartment and had hoped he wouldn't think it was slumming and beneath him. Instead, he'd settled in quite happily and started renovating one of the brownstones he'd acquired to become their home. Her mom had given Ahmed the cold shoulder at first, but who could resist the man's charm? And those deep brown eyes. Ahmed waited for her in a tailored black tuxedo, a faint smile curving his lips. They already had a name picked out for the baby, who should be along in a few months. Caius Martin Al-Qasimi. Once Caius appeared, she'd been warned that the Sultan would want them to visit. Hands shaking, she started down the aisle. Ahmed had proven he really did have an instinct about business. He'd been right about Catering specializing in gallery openings, art events, and business meetings. Catering was going to turn a profit this year, and their blend of Western and Middle Eastern favorites had started a new trend. She'd put off a second wedding until she was certain the first one would stick. But her mom had kept pushing. So had Ahmed. What choice did a girl have when both her husband and her mother ganged up on her? And then the baby started to kick. She put a hand on her stomach. She'd wanted to get to the point where she could take the time off for a real honeymoon without having to worry about whether her business would survive or not. She'd wanted time to make certain Ahmed wanted to stay around. She was now sure of both things. It was time to stand up in front of their families and friends and make this staying together forever official. It seemed this Cinderella really was getting her happy ever after. And Ahmed had even bought her glass shoes, well, silk encrusted with crystals, to cement the deal. She reached Ahmed's side. He looked at her with enough love in his eyes that a shiver slipped over her skin. "Family and friends, we are gathered here today to join Ahmed Al-Qasimi in matrimony with Melanie Martin." From there, the ceremony became as much a blur as her first wedding had been.
Ahmed had to nudge her when it was time to say "I do." She smiled up at him and said, "Kabul, Kabul, Kabul. I accept." He grinned back and then said, "I do." Then he leaned closer and asked, "Do I get to kiss you now?" She smiled. "Only if you really mean it." "Oh, I do. As I mean every kiss that I give you, my wife, my own, my very sensual American." Epilogue. Melanie was nervous about leaving Caius with Casey and Khalid, and with the Sultan. It was Caius's first visit to Sharjah, and her and Ahmed's first time back since their wedding. She'd been nervous about her reception, and a little worried the Sultan might throw Ahmed into jail, take Caius, and extradite her ass back to New York. Instead, the Sultan had taken one look at the fat, pouting, and travel-weary baby, who was about ready to throw a royal tantrum, and the man had broken into a stiff smile.
"Ah, he looks just like Ahmed did at that age."
The Sultan had swept Caius from Melanie's arms, tossed him up, caught him, and tickled the boy's belly. Gurgling laughs, not screams, had followed, and yet she was still nervous about leaving her baby boy. Ahmed slipped an arm around her waist. "Will you stop frowning? My father has what delights him, a grandson and a potential heir to the throne, and we have 3 days of babysitting. After my father, it will be my uncles and aunts who must see the boy, and Khalid's Casey adores babies. You have made her day by letting her spoil our son." Melanie shook her head. The palace seemed overflowing with people. Relatives, no doubt. A band was playing traditional music, which sounded off-key to her, but it was the Sultan's party after all. He had made a few concessions to his sons. The food offered up included lamb, beef, and a dazzling display of pastries. Melanie glanced at her husband. "Our son is going to be overfed, spoilt, and impossible once we get him home again." Smiling, Ahmed said, "He is home, my sensual American. He will grow up in 2 worlds, with a foot in each." She glanced at him. "And will he grow up responsible? Or more like you?" Ahmed shook his head. "That will be up to him, for I am not going to make my father's mistake of ruling his life. No, I will make a whole different set of mistakes with him that are entirely my own." The Sultan had given over the baby to the line of waiting aunts and came over to Ahmed. Melanie watched, a breath caught in her chest. She knew that Ahmed still wanted his father's respect, but things were different now. Ahmed no longer needed that. The Sultan gave Melanie a glance and faced his youngest son.
"That trick you played, letting me think you were marrying Nasiji,
was no more than you deserved, father, for trying to force me into something not of my choosing. I did warn you." For an instant, the Sultan seemed what he'd always been, a hard man, his jaw set and his eyes flinty. But Melanie could see the signs of age on him, the sag to his jaw, the broadening nose that now seemed to stand out on his face, the lines around his eyes. Slowly, he gave a nod and a tight smile.
"That you did."
He turned to Melanie.
"Does he behave himself as a husband and a father should? You have no complaints?"
"And if I do, what? You'd beat him with a stick?" The Sultan faced Ahmed, father and son. She could see Ahmed better now in the older man, the same strong nose and cheekbones, the stubborn chin. Their stares met, and Melanie held her breath. And then a tiny smile lifted the Sultan's mouth, and he shook his head.
"No, I think Ahmed too large now for beatings, but that does not mean he would escape without a stern lecture. A good woman is to be prized above all things, my son."
Ahmed smiled and put a hand on his chest. "I live to do my father's bidding." The Sultan huffed out a breath.
"No, you live to be the bane of your father's life, but I will let that pass for now. We have guests, and it would please me if you would do more than stand in a corner with your lovely wife."
Ahmed gave a laugh. "I think that is the first time you have ever asked me to circulate at a party." "With pleasure, father. Come, wife, you have people to meet and a smile to paste into place." For the next 2 hours, Melanie bowed, listened to endless Arabic. She only understood one word in 3 and didn't have enough verbs to carry on a conversation. The baby seemed to dominate all discussion, but business crept into things, with others asking Ahmed to ask his father for favors. Ahmed seemed both pleased at such an idea and irritated. Escaping at last to the food set out, he told her, "I have never had such sympathy for my brothers, or such a wish to still be the son who is ignored and treated as if he can do nothing right. Now I seem to be the son who is golden, and I see my brothers basking in the company of lovely women while I must talk until I'm sick of my own voice." She laughed. "Quite a change from when I met you in New York. You were the ultimate escape artist." He grabbed her hand. "Good. Let's see if we can recreate that moment and find our own party. I find all this respect and good behavior to be wearing." She shook her head at him, but he led her from the party. The noise of the music and laughter and conversation faded. He took her upstairs and down corridors and up even more stairs. Finally, he opened a door and they stepped out onto the flat, tiled rooftop. She was very much reminded of how she had once escaped a catered business event, heading out onto a terraced balcony, only to have Ahmed follow her. Stopping, she looked up. The sky had turned purple, and stars seemed splashed across it in a line. The stars were brighter here than in New York, the air crisper. They had to be 4 floors up, and from here she could see out over the waters of the Persian Gulf. To the west, the last light of the setting sun glimmered off the dark waters. She couldn't hear the surf, but the air carried a tang of salt as well as the desert dryness. Melanie smiled. The sun was probably only rising on her home in America. Ahmed wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Mrs. Ahmed Al-Qasimi. I don't think I will ever tire of saying such a thing. Mrs. Ahmed Al-Qasimi." He kissed the spot behind her ear. "It feels—" She let the words trail off as she thought over what she was feeling. "It feels right," she finally said. "Like this is how my life is supposed to be." His arms tightened. "I will say the same thing. This is very right. What do you think of the new building I am buying? A good one, yes? And I am looking now to buy in Sharjah. There is no need to sneak around anymore behind my father's back." "No, instead he'll spoil our son." She turned and faced him. "And you know I know nothing about buildings. But I've been thinking we should set up a division of Catering here in Sharjah. Oh, and I got a letter from Nasiji. She's settled in Paris and is starting a cooking school." Ahmed laughed. "Nasiji knows how to cook." "No, but apparently Jamul does and adores good food. She swears he is going to get fat, so she sends him to the gym every day." Ahmed shook his head. "Poor Jamul." "Poor Jamul, nothing. He signed up for it and is probably as happy as a cat in cream." "Perhaps we should visit them. Take a second honeymoon?" She smiled. "I didn't know the first one was over." Ahmed glanced around them. "Listen, there is no Caius demanding our attention. Instead, he is wrapping my father around his little fingers." Melanie smiled and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Just what are you suggesting? That we ignore this breathtaking view?" "Oh, I was thinking of taking your breath in other ways." "Really? You know, New York is probably just waking up right now. And you're right. Our son should know both this world as well as his American world." Ahmed gave a low hum. "There is something poetic in that, though I cannot seem to find it." Leaning down, he kissed her. He straightened and said, "I told you I was lucky, and I was more than lucky to follow you out of that hotel suite and then to seduce you." "You seduced me, did you? I thought it was mutual." "No, I definitely worked my charms on you to bring you to my arms." She smiled. "Then you'd better do it again. I have jet lag nipping at me, and I keep thinking about a nice, soft, big bed." He grinned. "So it shall be." Lifting her up, he carried her back inside and down the stairs. She didn't recognize the room he took her into. Candles lit the way. dozens of them, reflecting bright, yellow glows in mirrors on the walls. She was surrounded by reflected light and her own image. Ahmed settled her onto the bed, draped with dark, luxuriously soft covers. He lay next to her, looking sleek and lazy as a well-fed cat, a very large, well-fed cat. She put her hands on his chest and fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, her tired fingers unable to undo even one. "Let me help," Ahmed said. He reached down and made short work of the buttons, stripping off his shirt and then hers. Her skin ached for his touch.
Sorry, readers. Here's where we fade to black due to YouTube explicit content guidelines. If you dream for the steam, you'll need to take a look in the book.
That was, as always, amazing. He let out a breath, rolled toward her, and draped an arm over her, possessive as ever. She snuggled into him. "Think we can do that again?" "Again and again, and as many times as you wish, my sensual American, for I am yours as long as you wish for me to be." "Oh, that's going to be forever and a day." He hummed against her skin. "Forever. I think I like the sound of that."
This has been The Sheikh's Accidental Heir, Sharjah Sheikhs Book 2, written by Leslie North, narrated by Nicholas Thurkettle.